They laughed at her dog, then he ran toward the fire. There were faster dogs, stronger ones, prettier ones. But when the moment came when fire licked the porch and a child's cry cut through the chaos, it wasn't the best trained dog that moved first. It was Coda. The limping one, the unwanted one, the one Ivy had loved before anyone else believed. What followed was more than a rescue. It was the unraveling of a town's bias, the birth of a movement, and the start of something called Hearts and Hounds. And it all began with a girl, a dog, and a decision that no one saw coming. Maple Hollow looked like something out of a postcard. Cobblestone streets curved lazily around storybook homes, their shutters painted cheerful pastels that hadn't chipped in years. Trees arched over sidewalks like nature's cathedral, and every front yard seemed to bloom in competitive perfection, fresh-cut grass, white porch swings, wind chimes that sang even when there was no wind. People waved here. They knew each other's names, birthdays, and blood types. But they also knew each other's secrets, especially the quiet ones. It was the kind of town that dressed itself in warmth but whispered in corners. To most, the Quinn house was the one with the rusted truck and the crooked mailbox that had been getting fixed soon for the past 4 years. It sat at the far end of Elmwood Drive, tucked behind a curtain of overgrown honeysuckle and hand-welded metal yard art that never quite matched. People called it quirky if they were being kind. Mostly, they just called it that place. Inside lived Lucas Quinn, a man who smelled like solder and silence. He was a widower, though most had long since stopped asking how he was coping. They assumed he wasn't. Lucas worked long hours at the machine shop just outside town, fixing busted trailers and cracked steel beams, his hands blackened by oil, his heart still stained by grief. Since his wife died 4 years ago from a brain aneurysm that gave no warning and left even less behind, Lucas had become quieter than most men dared to be. But his silence was never empty. And then there was Ivy, his 10-year-old daughter, who walked like she was constantly apologizing to the world for taking up space. She had scoliosis, the kind that bent her spine like a question mark, one shoulder higher than the other, a gait that made her footsteps uneven, like a song skipping on vinyl. At first glance, people didn't always notice, but children notice everything. And children, especially the ones in Maple Hollow, had a cruel kind of curiosity. They called her names at school. Cricket back, Maple Mutant, Hobble Girl. At first, Ivy flinched every time. Then she stopped. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it hurt too often to keep reacting. She learned to walk a little faster between classes, to eat lunch in the farthest corner of the cafeteria, and to pretend that she preferred her own company. The truth? She liked quiet, yes, but not loneliness. There's a difference. Lucas noticed. Of course he did. But grief is a slow fog. It doesn't make you blind, it just makes everything harder to reach. He tried. He left notes in her lunchbox, bad dad jokes and half-crumpled paper hearts. He'd sing old country songs while welding in the garage, hoping she'd peek her head in and ask what he was doing. Sometimes she did. Most times she didn't. Their home was filled with the kinds of conversations that never made it to words. A hand on the shoulder instead of advice. A reheated meal instead of a question. A light left on in the hallway, just in case. Ivy didn't cry about school anymore. She'd stopped telling him what the other kids said. But the way she lingered at the door every morning, adjusting her hoodie sleeves, told him everything. She'd learned the art of small movements, keeping her head down, her hair in her face, her step soft. What the town didn't know, what even Lucas didn't fully understand, was that Ivy wasn't weak. She was weathered. And there's a difference. She carried her pain like a pocket knife always tucked away, sharp but hidden. Her drawings, dozens of them, were filled with strange, beautiful creatures. Foxes with wings, wolves with armor, lions with bent spines and crooked tails. She never showed them to anyone. But Lucas found them sometimes, tucked into her notebooks, under her pillow. The animals always looked fierce, but they always looked tired, too. At school, Ivy had no friends. Not really. A girl named Molly had tried once, back in 2nd grade, but when Ivy tripped during a class presentation and the laughter started, Molly didn't sit next to her again. By the time Ivy turned 10, she'd already learned one of life's crueler lessons. Sometimes, people don't need to say you're not enough, they just need to show you you're alone. Still, every morning she got up, brushed her teeth, pulled her tangled hair into the same lopsided ponytail, slipped on her oversized hoodie and sneakers that were more fray than fabric, and she walked out that door like she had somewhere to be. Because she did. Even if the world didn't notice, Lucas would stand behind the curtain sometimes, coffee in hand, watching her limp down the driveway. Part of him wanted to call out, say something comforting. But what do you say to a kid who's learning how cruel the world can be before she's even hit middle school? Instead, he'd whisper something under his breath. Always the same words. "You're tougher than they'll ever know, kiddo." And then he'd go back to welding. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when everything began to shift when the first breath of something new blew into Maple Hollow. The air had that bite that hinted at autumn. The sky was the color of old denim. And down on Route 7, miles from the Quinn house, a three-legged shadow was crawling through the gravel, leaving behind a trail of blood and dust. But Ivy didn't know that yet. She just walked through another day, unaware that her life, her quiet, bruised, steady life, was about to be tethered to something broken. And somehow, in the cracks of two separate hurts, something unshakable was waiting to grow. The sound came just after midnight, a thin, ragged howl cutting through the hush of Maple Hollow like a tear in fabric. Lucas Quinn didn't hear it at first. His hands were still wrapped around a cracked mug of instant coffee, his back aching from another double shift at the welding yard. Outside, the wind stirred the dry leaves along County Road 12, the only road in or out of town that didn't have a name people remembered just a number and a reputation for trouble. Lucas wouldn't have been out there at all if not for the raccoons. Something had been knocking over the trash cans behind the shop for 3 nights straight, and tonight he'd had enough. He grabbed a flashlight, slipped into his boots, and mumbled half-hearted threats to whatever was bold enough to dig through oil rags and rusted bolts. But it wasn't a raccoon. He saw it from a distance, first a strange, dark shape dragging itself through the gravel near the shoulder of the road. At first glance, it looked like some old tire shred or a forgotten bag flapping in the breeze. But then it moved again. Slow, crawling, struggling, alive. Lucas walked faster, then ran. His boots kicked up dust and bits of broken glass as he approached, the flashlight beam catching the glint of something metallic buried in fur. When he got close enough to see clearly, his breath caught in his throat. It was a Doga German Shepherd, or what was left of one. The animal was collapsed on its side, ribs pressing through its skin like the bones were trying to escape. One of its hind legs was bent at an angle that no living thing should tolerate, the lower half torn open and raw. There was dried blood on its muzzle, a smear of dirt across its flank, and around its neck, miraculously still intact, was a scorched K9 collar, half melted, blackened, and clinging to a single tag that read simply, Coda, Unit 31. Lucas dropped to his knees. "Hey, buddy, hey." The dog's eyes opened. One was swollen nearly shut, but the other locked onto Lucas with something that didn't feel like fear. It felt like exhaustion, surrender. But beneath it, something fierce still burned. That one eye didn't beget asked, "Are you going to leave me too?" Lucas swore under his breath and looked around. The road was empty, save for a flickering gas station sign a half-mile down. He pulled off his flannel and laid it over the dog gently, wrapping it like a wound that couldn't be stitched. The shepherd didn't growl, didn't whimper, just let him. "You're not supposed to be here," Lucas muttered. "None of us are." He lifted the dog with both arms, careful to keep the twisted leg still. The weight was almost nothing like carrying a ghost that hadn't decided yet whether to stay or go. Blood soaked into his shirt. He didn't care. By the time he reached the truck, the porch light at Mrs. Grover's house across the road blinked on. Her voice carried even from her stoop. "Lucas Quinn, don't you bring that mangy thing into town." He didn't answer, just opened the passenger door, laid the dog across an old blanket, and started the engine. Mrs. Grover shouted something about disease, about danger, about how those police dogs were trained to kill. But Lucas wasn't listening. He'd seen enough in his life to know that danger didn't always wear teeth. Some nights it looked a lot more like loneliness. The vet clinic was closed. Of course it was. But Lucas didn't go to the front. He parked around back and pounded on the emergency entrance until the overnight assistant, a young woman with sleepy eyes and a messy bun, stumbled out. Startled, she took one look at the blood on his arms, the limp figure in his truck, and without a word, disappeared into the clinic and returned with a gurney. "He's a shepherd," Lucas said, helping her load him onto the cart. "K9. Tag says Coda. No idea where he came from." "Doesn't matter," the assistant replied. "He's here now." They wheeled him inside, and as the door swung shut, Lucas caught a final glimpse of the dog's eye still open, still watching him, as if taking inventory of this man who hadn't turned away. That night, Lucas sat in the clinic's waiting room, dried blood on his hands, dirt on his boots, and a worry in his chest he didn't know how to name. He hadn't asked for this. Had enough heartbreak for one lifetime already. A dead wife, a daughter born into pain, a garage full of machines that ran smoother than his life ever had. But when the vet came out hours later and said, "We might have to take the leg, but he's got fight in him," Lucas didn't hesitate. "Do it," he said. "Give him a chance." The next morning, Ivy found the blanket on the couch, still stained. She found her father asleep in the old recliner, arms crossed like he tried to hold something in, and failed halfway. And then she saw him. The dog, wrapped in fresh bandages, half asleep in a makeshift bed of towels and old jackets. She didn't speak, just stood there, looking. Lucas woke up with a start. "Ivy, what's his name?" she asked softly. Lucas looked over. The tag still hung loosely from the melted collar. "Coda." Ivy crouched beside the bed. Coda opened one eye. Not quite trust, but not fear either. The kind of look that said, "You've been through it too, haven't you?" The garage behind the Quinn house wasn't much, just corrugated metal sheets held together by rust, time, and Lucas's stubborn repairs. But tonight, it pulsed with something heavier. Not just engine oil and welding sparks, but the quiet weight of two beings who weren't quite sure if they belonged anywhere anymore. The air smelled of steel and rain. A storm was whispering at the edges of Maple Hollow, just enough to tap against the windows like fingers wanting in. Inside, under the pale swing-arm bulb, Coda lay curled on a pile of repurposed towels, leg freshly bandaged, his body half-shaved and stitched, as still as an old statue that had seen too much. Ivy stepped inside without a word. She didn't make a sound, not the squeak of sneakers, not a breath out of place. She stood at the doorway like she wasn't sure whether she was allowed in. Her hands clutched tight around the sleeves of her oversized hoodie. Spine curved, head tilted slightly like always. But her eyes, those eyes, were sharp and searching, like she was trying to memorize him before he disappeared too. Lucas looked up from the workbench but didn't speak. He knew the rules. If Ivy was going to say something, it'd be in her own time, in her own language, the kind made of glances and silence and the sound of pencil scratches late at night. Her feet shuffled closer. Step, step, and then stillness. She was only a few feet away from Coda now, close enough to see the rise and fall of his breathing, the way his nose twitched every few seconds like he was dreaming about a place far away. His ears didn't perk, his eyes didn't open. But there was no tension in him, no flinch, just acceptance. "Does it hurt?" Ivy asked softly, as if the words might startle him. Lucas blinked. It wasn't clear if the question was meant for him or the dog. Coda didn't move. Ivy dropped to her knees on the cold garage floor, ignoring the grit and oil stains. She sat cross-legged, mirroring the way Coda lay twisted, her own shoulders uneven from the way her spine pulled one higher than the other. She didn't reach out, didn't touch, just sat. Two figures, one stitched, one scarred, sitting in the glow of a humming light bulb, like they were trying to figure out how broken things found their way to each other. "You know," Ivy whispered after a long pause, "I walk weird too." Still, no reaction. But something softened in her voice, something that cracked open a little more of the truth. "They say it's because my back's shaped like a question mark. Maybe that's why I ask too many." She smiled without showing teeth. A private smile. The kind you give someone who's seen you fall before. Coda's ear twitched. Lucas watched from his corner of the garage, wrench in hand, pretending to tighten something that didn't need tightening. But he was listening. Every word. Every breath. Ivy looked at the half-melted K9 tag, still dangling from Coda's collar. She squinted, tilted her head, then whispered with a sense of quiet certainty. "Coda." She let the name sit there, like a pebble dropped in still water. I think it means friend, she added. Or brave? Or maybe both. Coda's eye opened just one, slit thin, tired but aware. It met hers, and for a moment, the air inside the garage thickened, not with words or sound, but something deeper, a tether, invisible and quiet. The kind of bond that doesn't begin with petting or play it, begins in broken places, in shared silences. Lucas set the wrench down slowly. Ivy, he started, voice low, like gravel under boots. He's not a pet, okay? He's seen things, bad things. He's still healing. So am I, she said without looking at him. Lucas stopped cold. No anger, no whining, just truth. A sharp, simple truth that hit harder than any argument could. They sat there for a long time. The storm outside grew louder, thunder rumbling somewhere far off. But inside the garage, it was steady, safe. Eventually, Ivy stood and walked to the corner shelf where Lucas kept old blueprints, torn notepads, and stubby pencils. She pulled one down, sat cross-legged again, and began to draw. Not in frantic lines like when she was upset, not in jagged shadows, but slow, careful, like she was outlining something sacred. Coda watched her now. His head hadn't lifted, but both eyes were open. The sketch took nearly an hour. Lucas didn't interrupt, just kept to himself, sanding an already sanded bolt. Finally, Ivy held it up. The drawing wasn't perfecter, lines weren't symmetrical, her shading wobbled in places, but the feeling was undeniable. It was Coda, lying down with one ear perked, one eye watching. In the background, a small figure sat beside him, hoodie draped over her knees. At the bottom, Ivy had written in neat block letters, "My brave shadow." She taped it to the wall of the garage, just above Coda's head. Then she leaned forward just a little and whispered so softly, even Lucas barely heard it, "You don't have to be whole to be mine." Coda blinked once, and for the first time since he'd arrived, his tail moved just a twitch against the towel. But enough. The pact had been made. The first day, Ivy walked back through the school gates with Coda at her side. It wasn't quiet, it was razor sharp. Maple Hollow Elementary had a way of smiling with its teeth. The brick building looked warm from a distance, hugged by trees and playgrounds, with flowers blooming in carefully arranged planters. But behind the cheerful bulletin boards and laminated "Be Kind" posters, cruelty lingered in corners, whispers tucked behind lockers, Snickers folded into recess games. Ivy knew this. She'd memorized it. But now, for the first time, she wasn't walking alone. She held the leash like it was something sacred. Coda walked beside her, not fast, not proud, just steady. His gait uneven, his brace clinking faintly with every third step. He didn't tug, didn't falter. He moved like he'd done this before, like school hallways were just another battlefield he'd been trained to survive. Her backpack bounced against her lower back, stitched with the tag Lucas had made. Not perfect, just brave. It didn't stop the staring. If anything, it drew them in. At first, it was just silence. Then came the first voice. "Look, it's the dog from the junkyard." Another followed. "Did she steal that thing from the vet clinic?" Then louder, bolder. "Hey, zombie dog girl. You and Limp, a lot got lost on the way to the circus?" Ivy kept walking. Coda didn't look at them. He never did. His ears flicked once, and his eyes stayed forward like he'd been trained not to engage. Like he understood that sometimes dignity is louder than bark. They passed a group of older girls near the gym doors. Their ponytails swished in synchronized malice. "Hey, Ivy, does your dog have rabies, or is that just how he drools?" A giggle. "I heard he only has 3 legs because he bit someone and they cut one off." More laughter. "He matches her spine now. That one stung." Ivy's shoulders tensed, but she didn't stop. She never stopped. Inside the classroom, things weren't better, just quieter. That kind of quiet that hums under your skin. Miss Dorman, her teacher, smiled in a pinched, uneasy way as Ivy entered with Coda. "Oh, you brought him today. He's approved," Ivy said, voice soft but firm. "I have the form." Miss Dorman took the paper with the enthusiasm of someone handed a dead fish. She skimmed it and gave a too bright smile. "Of course. Just keep him in the back." Ivy nodded. No protest, No eye contact. Just like always. Coda curled beside her desk, his body a silent wall between her and the world. When someone dropped a pencil, he didn't flinch. When a chair scraped, his ears twitched but stayed low. He didn't whine, didn't seek attention, just watched. Like a soldier trained to guard something precious even when the war didn't look like a war. By lunch, the whispers had turned to phone screens. Someone had taken a photo of Ivy and Coda in the hallway and added a caption in bold white letters. Cricket, back and crutch pup. New school mascots? It was already making its rounds. Ivy found her usual table far corner, near the supply closet where the vending machine buzzed. She sat. Coda lay down beneath her chair, head resting between his front paws. The metal leg brace glinted faintly in the light. 2 kids passed by and fake limped as they walked, snorting with laughter. Ivy said nothing. Her face didn't change, but her fingers clenched around the sandwich in her hand just a little too tightly. The crust broke. So did something in her chest. But when she looked down, Coda was already watching her. His eyes didn't ask anything. They didn't pity. They just stayed on her like he was counting every breath, like he knew the weight of being stared at, too. After recess, it got worse. A boy named Parker Tall, fast, the kind who always won at dodgeball and knew it cornered her near the water fountain. Hey, did your dog lose his leg fighting dragons or just tripped over his own ego? Another boy added, bet she walks like that so they match. Ivy turned, slowly. She didn't say a word. Behind her, Coda rose. He didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth. Just stood, tall, uneven, calm. His one good eye fixed on Parker like it was reading something deeper than the boy knew how to hide. For a full 3 seconds, no one moved. Then Parker scoffed, muttered something about freaks, and walked off. Ivy crouched beside Coda and ran her hand gently along the scar behind his ear. You're better than all of them, she whispered. That night at home, Lucas found Ivy curled up with her sketchpad again. This time she wasn't drawing fantasy creatures or winged wolves. She was sketching a hallway narrow, cluttered with locker sand in the center. A girl hunched just slightly, and a dog beside her, standing tall. On the edge of the page, in small, careful letters, she wrote, even shadows stand taller when they're not alone. Lucas didn't say anything, just kissed the top of her head and walked to the garage, where Coda lay asleep on his side, chest rising slow and steady. He whispered, just once, almost to himself, thanks for walking with her. There was a bench under the old cedar tree behind the school cafeteria, half-forgotten sliver of shadow where no one ever sat. That's where Ivy went. The bell for lunch had rung 5 minutes ago, but she'd already slipped away, tray untouched, notebook in hand. Coda trotted beside her, his limp softer now, familiar, almost synchronized with the rhythm of her uneven gait. She lowered herself carefully onto the bench and sat cross-legged, the journal already open on her knees. Coda settled beneath her like a curled comma, his head resting lightly against her sneaker, eyes scanning the field as if his job was to watch the wind itself. No one came back here, and that was the point. In that quiet, Ivy drew. The world she sketched didn't look like Maple Hollow. It didn't have bullies, or pitying adults, or squeaky classroom chairs. Her world was wilder, stitched with moonlight and storm. Here, animals weren't just animals. They were protectors, wanderers, warriors. She dragged the pencil across the page, smudging soft shadows with the edge of her palm. A creature emerged, part wolf, part stag, with wings made of tree bark and scars that glowed like embers. It had one broken antler and a missing leg. Still, it stood tall. Ivy titled, The Drawing. The last 4 sentinel. Coda exhaled beneath her, as if he knew. She leaned forward and traced over the scar on the creature's shoulder, giving it more depth, more memory. Then, faint footsteps behind her. Lucas. He stayed a few feet away, unsure if he should speak. He'd seen her from the faculty parking lot and followed, carrying her forgotten lunch tray in both hands cold grilled cheese and an untouched juice box. Ivy, he said gently. She didn't look up, just moved her hand to a new page. Lucas sat down beside her, placing the tray between them. You didn't eat. She gave a small shrug. He tried again. Can I see? At first, she didn't respond. Then, slowly, she turned the journal toward him. The page fluttered to a new sketch, this one roar, darker. A massive dog made of smoke and fire, with only 3 legs, stood at the edge of a cliff. Beneath it, tiny human figures pointing, laughing, running away. Above them, they only see the missing parts. Lucas swallowed. That's incredible. Ivy didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her fingers tightened around the spine of the sketchbook. Lucas stared at the page longer than he meant to. Every line had something in it: grief, resistance, something ancient and unsaid. This was more than a hobby. This was Ivy speaking in a language no one at school had the patience to hear. "I used to draw too, you know," he said, voice soft. She blinked, surprised. Before, he hesitated. Before everything changed. She looked at him then, just a flicker. Just enough to say, "I remember." Lucas rubbed the back of his neck. "You've got talent, kiddo. Real talent." She looked away again into the trees. "It doesn't matter." Lucas frowned. "Why not?" She didn't answer. Because how could she explain that in a town like this, drawings didn't protect you? That no one cared how well you rendered a dragon if your back curved like a question mark? That kids didn't call you brave when you limped to school beside a wounded dog. They just laughed. Coda shifted below her and rested his head gently on her knee. Lucas watched the way Ivy's hand fell on his fur without thinking. The way her fingers moved like she was anchoring herself to something she still didn't believe she deserved. "Ivy," he began. "I know I haven't been." She looked up. "I mean, since your mom? I've just been trying to hold things together. And I know that sometimes it probably feels like I'm just surviving." That got her attention. Lucas forced a small laugh. "Truth is, most mornings I don't even match my socks. If your mom could see me now, she'd probably haunt me for how I butter toast." Ivy's mouth twitched. Lucas softened. "But I'm trying. I really am. I just don't always know what to say." Ivy traced the corner of a new page. Her voice, when it came, was so small it barely reached him. "You don't have to say anything." He waited. She glanced down at Coda. "You just have to stay." The moment hung between them, fragile, aching, beautiful. Lucas nodded, blinking against the sudden tightness in his throat. "I can do that." He reached out and gently slid the lunch tray closer to her. Ivy looked down at it, then at him. "Grilled cheese is cold," she said. "It's cafeteria food," he replied. "It was never hot to begin with." She smiled. It was faint, tilted like her sketches. But it was real. They sat there together in the shadows, the widower who didn't know how to fix things, and the girl who didn't want fixing. Only truth. Between them, a journal full of beasts with broken wings and brave eyes. And under them, a silent sentinel with 3 legs and the patience of something that had already died once and come back stronger. In Ivy's world, monsters weren't the ones with scars. They were the ones who couldn't see beauty through them. And sitting in the shade of the cedar, Lucas finally began to see his daughter, not the bent back or the quiet lunches, but the furnace of imagination burning beneath her silence. He didn't know how to shield her from the world. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to. Maybe he just had to keep showing up. The garage smelled of pine, sawdust, and rust. Lucas had been sanding the edge of an old wooden workbench for the past 20 minutes, though he hadn't needed to. It was just something to keep his hands busy while his mind wandered where it wasn't supposed to go. Memories of Camila, the years before, the way she used to hum off key when helping Ivy with school projects. The way Ivy used to laugh. Now the house was quieter. Not silent. Coda's claws clicked softly on the linoleum, and Ivy's pencil scratched lines into her sketchbook. Most evenings, but quieter in a way grief made permanent. Lucas wiped his hands on a rag and turned to the small box beside the vice grip. Inside, 2 blank aluminum discs caught the low light from the desk lamp. He'd ordered them online. Cheap. Unofficial. Just right. He pressed one into the clamp and began etching by hand. It wasn't perfect, wasn't a jeweler, just a man trying to build meaning from scraps. But the words were clear. Not perfect. Just brave. He traced them with his thumb, then reached for the second disc. Ivy stood in the doorway later that night, half hidden in the glow of the hallway light. Her hair was braided unevenly over one shoulder, her posture lopsided in a way that made strangers stare. But Lucas saw something else, something untamed and unshaken. He held the tags out in his palm. "I made these," he said. Ivy stepped forward slowly. Coda padded beside her, tail low but wagging once. "For me?" she asked. "For you?" Lucas nodded, then looked at Coda. "And him?" He held up the tag with the slightly misshapen engraving. It gleamed, soft and unfinished, just like the three of them. She took the smaller tag first, the one with a black cord looped through the toe band, slipped it over her head. The disc settled against her chest, light as breath, but heavy with something that made her shoulders square for the first time in weeks. "Not perfect," she read aloud, running her thumb across the word. "Just brave." Lucas smiled, lips pressed tight, thought it might suit. She didn't answer right away, just looked down at Coda, who sat patiently by her feet. "Can I put his on?" Lucas handed her the second tag, already threaded onto a new collar. Ivy crouched, wincing a little from the ache in her back, and slid the collar gently around Coda's neck. The dog didn't flinch, just lifted his head like he understood. And maybe he did, because the moment the tag clicked into place, Coda stood taller, his scarred leg trembling, but bearing weight. He looked at Ivy with a kind of stillness that said, "I carry it with you." She whispered, "Now we match." At school the next day, Ivy walked into homeroom wearing the tag like armor. It clinked faintly as she moved, catching the fluorescent light with each step. Coda stayed glued to her side, shoulder brushing her knee, his gait uneven but steady. The tin tag on his collar gleamed with each tilt of his head. The classroom fell quiet. Some kids started. Others snorted. "Nice dog charm," someone muttered. "Gonna teach it to bark equations?" A few laughs followed. Not loud, not kind. Ivy didn't look up. She kept walking past the whisperers, past the pitying glance of her homeroom teacher, all the way to the seat by the window. Coda laid down beside her chair, curling into his usual sentinel pose. Her hand found the tag again. She pressed her palm against it. Not perfect, just brave. She didn't need to be loud, or fast, or symmetrical. She just had to be brave enough to take up space. Later that week, Lucas picked her up early from school for an orthopedic appointment. She climbed into the truck in silence, but as he pulled out of the parking lot, she reached into her pocket and unfolded a drawing. It was of Coda only, not quite. In the drawing, he stood on a cliff made of shattered trophies and broken desks, his head high. His missing leg turned into a steel prosthetic made of tree roots and wire. Around his neck, the tag gleamed brighter than any metal. Lucas studied it quietly. "I love this," he said. Ivy looked out the window. "He doesn't bark back at the kids." "He doesn't need to," Lucas replied. "His presence says enough." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's how I want to be." Lucas turned to her at a red light. "How?" "Like him. Quiet, but solid. Like even when people don't get it, he still shows up." Lucas reached over and gently tapped the tag on her chest. "You already are." That night, Ivy added something new to her sketchbook. A symbol she hadn't drawn before, a medal shaped like a dog tag, resting on an open palm, above the words, "Courage isn't loud." Coda sat beside her bed, his breathing steady. When she reached down to scratch behind his ears, he nudged her wrist gently just once and rested his head on her foot like a seal of trust. They were far from perfect. But in the quiet corners of a house that had lost its light, the soft jingle of matching tags became a rhythm, a promise, a battle cry dressed as a whisper. And that whisper was enough. It was the kind of Tuesday that felt off before it even started. The sky over Sycamore Middle hung low and colorless, like the world had forgotten how to be blue. Ivy had woken up late. Her brace pinched her spine more than usual, and Lucas had nearly spilled coffee on Coda's leash in the rush out the door. Even the hallway lights at school buzzed louder than normal tinny, fluorescent, intrusive. By the time lunch arrived, her knuckles were already raw from holding her pencil too tight during math. The cafeteria line dragged like molasses. She hated this room, the way it echoed laughter, but never the good kind, and how the ceiling seemed too high, like it was watching everyone with judgment. Coda walked beside her, his limp more pronounced after the cold morning, but steady. Ivy held her tray with both hands, moving slowly past a table of boys in varsity hoodies, the kind who smelled like overused body spray and knew it. "Here comes the zombie dog and her pet," one of them muttered. Ivy kept walking. Eyes forward, shoulders squared. She was halfway to her usual corner when her foot caught on something, a loose strap, or the subtle drag of her own brace, and the tray tilted. Time slowed. Plastic clattered. Pasta flew. Chocolate milk arced in the air like a cruel magic trick. And then, silence. Ivy was on one knee, frozen. Spaghetti smeared down her hoodie. Her fork spun under a table like a broken compass. The sound of chairs scraping followed. Then a sharp laugh from a boy named Nathan. "Nice one, Maple Mutant." The cafeteria erupted not in laughter, exactly, but in that awful hush before it. The kind that burns more than shouting. A few snickers, someone whispering cricket back, and the unmistakable sound of a phone camera snapping a picture. Ivy didn't move, didn't cry, didn't even blink, just sat there, humiliated and silent, her gaze fixed on a blob of mashed potatoes near her shoe. And then she felt its warmth on her knee. Coda. He had stepped in beside her without hesitation, laying his massive head gently on her leg. No bark, no growl, no flashy defense. Just that soft pressure, like he was absorbing the impact into his own bones. The cafeteria didn't understand it, but Ivy did. Coda was shielding her the only way he knew how, by being a wall, a weight, an anchor. One of the lunch monitors walked over, frowning but not quite helpful. "Accidents happen," she said, kneeling down with a paper towel like that would fix the burn. Ivy stood slowly. Coda stood too. Together, they walked past the laughter and the whispers and the plastic trays, leaving behind the mess. Ivy didn't look back. Didn't need to. In the nurse's office, Ivy sat on the vinyl bench while Coda curled at her feet. She tugged her sleeves down, hiding the sauce stains, while the nurse asked routine questions she didn't really want answers to. "You sure you don't want to call your dad?" Ivy shook her head, because what would she say? "Hey, Dad, someone called me a mutant again, and I dropped a lunch I didn't even want to eat?" Number. Lucas had enough to worry about this overtime hours. The property tax deadline. The look he got every time he passed Camila's old studio and didn't go in. The nurse handed her a wet cloth. "Just dab gently. That hoodie might be a goner." Ivy didn't care. The hoodie wasn't the thing that hurt. That night, Ivy sat cross-legged on the garage floor, surrounded by her sketchbook, a small lamp, and the smell of old motor oil. Coda lay beside her, breathing steady. She was drawing again, but not Coda this time. She was drawing a girl, bent-backed, in a hoodie patched with tree bark and stars. Her hands were leaves, her shoes were roots, and from her chest grew a ribbon of molten gold curling into the shape of a hound. It was the version of herself she wanted to believe in. One that didn't shatter when people laughed. One that didn't flinch when called names. Coda stirred beside her, then let out a soft huff. She smiled and whispered, "You don't care if I'm a mutant, huh?" The dog nudged her arm gently. Almost in answer, she flipped the page and wrote something at the top in block letters. "Bad days make brave ones." Then she tore the page out, folded it 3 times, and slipped it under Coda's collar like a secret medal. Down the hall, Lucas peeked through the garage door, unseen. He had heard about the incident from the school. The counselor had left a voicemail, but he didn't step in, not yet. Instead, he watched his daughter sit with a half-lame dog in a garage that smelled like ghosts and resilience, and draw her way back from humiliation. He whispered to himself, "Just brave," and let the door click shut behind him. The house was quieter than usual that night. Even the wind seemed reluctant to press against the windows, like it too was holding its breath. Upstairs, Ivy lay curled beneath her patchwork blanket, worn soft by time and the gentle fingers of her mother long ago. The overhead light was off, but the small amber glow of a reading lamp warmed the edge of her pillow, flickering slightly with each shift of her breath. Coda lay beside her on the floor, his body curved like a crescent moon against the side of the bed. His breathing was slow, steady, his only remaining ear twitching now and then, like he was half guarding. Even in dreams, Ivy couldn't sleep. Not after today, not after the lunchroom, not after the way people looked at her, not with cruelty, but with that awful mix of pity and discomfort, like she was a crack in the glass no one wanted to touch. She reached down and rested her hand on Coda's side. His fur, rough in some places, soft in others, rose and fell beneath her palm. The scar above his ribs was still healing, a pale web of memory pressed into skin. She traced it absent-mindedly, as if drawing her own strength from it. "Coda!" she whispered, barely more than breath. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open with the kind of awareness only a dog like him could carry, alert, yet calm, as if saying, "I'm here, I'm listening, I always was." She blinked, once, twice, and then let it spill. "Why can't they see you the way I do?" Her voice cracked on the last word, barely audible, but it filled the room like thunder. "You saved something. I don't know what, but I know you did." Coda shifted, his head lifting enough to rest gently on the edge of her bed. His good eye met hers. It was not the eye of a pet. It was the gaze of someone who knew war and still chose softness. "I hate them sometimes," she continued, voice trembling. "I hate that they laugh at you, that they call me things, that they look at your leg like it's broken instead of proof." She sat up slightly, chest aching. "I wish they knew you're not the one who's broken." The silence returned, but not empty. It hung thick, full of the kind of truth you don't say aloud unless the night is quiet enough to protect it. She leaned over and kissed the top of Coda's head, just between the scar and the graying fur. Her hands trembled as they folded around his tag, that small plate Lucas had made that read, "Not perfect, just brave." Her fingers held onto it like it was the only thing anchoring her. Coda didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence was the answer to a question she hadn't fully asked. Downstairs, in the garage that had become more workshop than parking space, Lucas sat in his chair. The wrench in his hand was cold, useless. It wasn't fixing anything tonight. He had come down here to escape the weight in his chest, but Ivy's words soft as they were carried through the house like wind through thin walls. He'd heard them, every syllable, and they gutted him. His knuckles whitened around the wrench, then loosened. He placed it gently on the bench beside a rusted tin box full of screws and memory. Lucas didn't cry. Men like him had learned to hold it in, to breathe through pain and bury it under duties and dishes and late-night bills. But this hurt was different. It wasn't just grief. It was powerlessness, the kind that gnawed at his insides like rust on a good blade. He'd tried so hard to keep Ivy going, to patch her back together with braces and therapy and distraction. But Coda? Coda had done in days what Lucas hadn't managed in months. And now his daughter was whispering heartbreak into the night, to a dog with a limp and one good eye. Lucas leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on nothing. "I should have said something," he muttered, to no one but himself. "I should have held her when she got home. I should have been more." The garage light flickered overhead, buzzing in its socket. He stared up at the ceiling like he could see her through it, see the child who still sketched to survive, who clung to a broken dog because he understood the language of pain in ways no adult ever could. Coda was more than a companion. He was a mirror. And maybe that's what scared Lucas most. Because if Coda was a hero, and Ivy was starting to believe she was, too thin, what did that make him? The bystander? He rubbed a hand over his face, dragging exhaustion down with it. Then, slowly, he stood, closed the toolbox, turned off the lamp. He didn't go back upstairs, but he sat just inside the door, still, quiet, listening. Because sometimes, the only thing more important than answers is being close enough to hear the questions. The sky hadn't quite decided what kind of morning it wanted to be. Pale gray light crept across the edges of Ivy's bedroom window, casting long shadows against her wall shadows that stretched but never threatened. They simply existed. Like Coda. Like her. She sat up slowly, blanket falling from her shoulders, and for a brief second, the world was still. No alarms, no voices, just breath. Coda was already awake. He always was. Curled at the foot of her bed, his body unmoving except for the steady rise and fall of his ribcage. When she stirred, his head-lifted eyes meeting hers. Wordless. Present. "Today," Ivy whispered, fingers brushing her tangled hair back, "we walk in the middle." Coda didn't wag his tail, didn't tilt his head, but something in the way his ear lifted scarred and incomplete told her he understood. Or maybe he'd been waiting for this. She reached for her backpack and the custom strap they'd fashioned for his side bracia, small loop and clip that allowed her bag to rest against his weight, not his wound. It made her feel like part of him, like she wasn't just walking next to Coda but with him, as if they were fused together by the same invisible thread of almost broken but still here. M. Downstairs, the kitchen was silent. Lucas had already left for the early shift at the firehouse. He'd left a sticky note on the counter, in his usual capital letters. Coffee cake on the stove. Proud of you, Dad. No other words. He wasn't one for them. But the cake was still warm under the foil. She didn't eat it. Not yet. Instead, Ivy clipped the bag to Coda's brace, slung on her hoodie, 3 sizes too big and worn thin at the sleeves, and walked out the door like it didn't matter what day it was. But it did. Today was Tuesday. The last Tuesday had been the worst day of her year. The lunchroom, the tray, the laughter. The words she still felt under her skin like old bruises. Maple mutant, zombie dog girl, freak leash kid. And yet, this morning felt different. Not because the world had changed, because she had. The walk to school was quiet, save for the crunch of leaves under Coda's slow, deliberate gait. His limp was more visible in the cold, the stiff joints reluctant at first. But he kept pace. He always kept pace. They passed the gas station, where Mr. Abbott gave her a nod but didn't say much. He never did. Past the crossing guard, who gave Coda a strange look but didn't stop them. And then past the chain-link fence that enclosed 100 voices and 1,000 unsaid things. Ivy inhaled sharply at the gate, and then stepped in. Inside, the noise returned. Hallways buzzed with morning chaos, locker doors slamming, sneakers squeaking, the artificial light of early adolescence bouncing off polished floors. Some heads turned, some whispered, some laughed. But she didn't, and neither did Coda. They walked down the main hall past the lost and found bin where her old rain boots once lived, past the office window where Mrs. Finley pretended not to notice the glances thrown their way, and then to the cafeteria. The cafeteria. She paused at the threshold. The room was already humming, backpacks dumped, milk cartons opened, half-chewed words thrown across tables like darts. Ivy felt the first sting of memory flare in her chest. The tray, the maple syrup, the laughter. But Coda brushed her leg. Not like a nudge, more like a signal. And she stepped forward. This time, she didn't hover by the edge, didn't sit behind the soda machine or near the back wall where the air always smelled faintly of mop water. She walked to the center of the room, right into the nucleus of it all where the world had made her small the week before. Coda's claws clicked gently on the linoleum. He didn't falter, not once. Ivy sat at the long table with the clearest view of everything, of everyone. A few students paused. One girl, Taylor, whispered something behind her sleeve. A boy elbowed his friend. Laughter began to bloom in tiny, mean corners. But Ivy didn't shift. She unzipped her sketch pad. She laid it flat and began to draw. Not them. Not the cafeteria. Not even Coda. She drew what she felt a tree made of rusted armor and blooming feathers. Its roots were broken chains, and its branches reached toward a sun shaped like an open eye. Coda lay beside her, head on paws, unmoved by the world, unmoved by the noise. He wasn't protecting her. He wasn't her shield. He was her mirror. The bell rang. Chair scraped. The storm was coming, she knew that. But for now, there was calm, a quiet before it all hit again. And this time, she would be ready. The announcement came like a lightning bolt buried in a pile of boring papers. Next Friday, Miss Whitmore said, her voice rising just slightly above the shuffling of binders and the dull scrape of pencil on desk. We'll be taking a field trip to Silver Creek Nature Reserve. Permission slips are going home today. Please have them signed by Wednesday. At the word field trip, a wave passed through the room. Not excitement. Exactly 6th graders were too practiced for that. But a shift. Heads lifted. Whispers started. Even the ones who hadn't smiled all year smiled just a little. All except Ivy. She didn't look up. She looked sideways. At the lump of fur curled beneath her desk, his head on his paws. His body half shadow, half warrior. Coda. Her hand tensed around her pencil. Nature Reserve. That meant trails, trees, open sky. It also meant people. All of them. All the time. Without him, number, not an option. After class, she waited. Let the crowd funnel out like a tide going home, leaving the shore empty. Then she approached Miss Whitmore's desk quiet as a heartbeat. The woman barely looked up, still sorting through permission slips with practiced indifference. Ivy's shadow fell across the stack. "Yes, Ivy? I wanted to ask," Ivy began, words catching like gravel in her throat. "If I can bring Coda." There was a pause, just long enough to be uncomfortable. Miss Whitmore glanced up, finally giving the girl her full attention. "Coda." A blink. "The dog." "Yes," Ivy said, standing straighter. "He's my ESA. It's in my file." "I'm aware," the teacher said carefully. "But a field trip is different than the classroom. There are liability issues, insurance, possible allergies. I can bring his papers," Ivy said too quickly. "He's had his shots. He doesn't bite. He's quieter than most of the class." That last bit landed like a pin dropped on glass. Miss Whitmore's lips thinned, but not in anger, something closer to weary amusement. "Ivy." The girl's fingers twisted in her hoodie sleeve. "I don't go if he doesn't." That stopped the conversation. Not a threat. A truth. Miss Whitmore studied her. The slouch of her shoulders, the tired hollows under her eyes, the way her fingertips brushed the top of Coda's head like grounding wires. The silence stretched long. Then, the teacher sighed deep, from some reservoir of reluctant compassion. "He can come," she said. Ivy's breath hitched. "But," Miss Whitmore added, raising a finger, "he stays in the back. No chasing squirrels. No barking. No distractions. He stays by you. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." Ivy nodded, hands still on Coda. "And if there's any incident, any complaint, I'll have to call your father." Ivy nodded again. "He won't be a problem. I promise." Coda's ears twitched at the word promise, as if it meant something, as if he remembered when words were more than just sounds humans threw into the air. Miss Whitmore returned to her stack of papers. "Then bring the proper forms tomorrow." That evening, Ivy unfolded the permission slip on the kitchen counter like it was a letter from another planet. Lucas glanced up from the sink, forearms still wet from washing dishes. "What's that?" "Field trip," she said. "Silver Creek, Friday." He dried his hands, walking over to read it. "That's up in the hills, right?" "Yeah." "You want to go?" She hesitated. "Only if Coda can come." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "He can," she added quickly. "Miss Whitmore said okay. She just needs your signature." Lucas took the paper, scanned it, then looked at her. Really looked. This wasn't just about trees and trails. It never was. "She's making him stay in the back," Ivy said, eyes flicking away. "Like he's some kind of problem." Lucas leaned back against the counter. "Well, sometimes people don't know how to handle what they don't understand. He's not just a dog. I know." "No, you don't." There was no bitterness in her voice. Just fact. Lucas nodded, silently conceding. Then he reached for the pen tucked behind his ear and scribbled his name at the bottom of the page. "There," he said, setting it back down. "One small battle. One." Ivy didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed just enough to be seen. Coda padded over and sat between them like a guardian who understood treaties and truces. Lucas knelt, scratching behind the dog's ear. "You got her this far?" he murmured, voice low enough to almost miss. "Just keep doing what you're doing, all right, soldier?" Coda blinked once. Silent, unmoved, unmistakably loyal. The next morning, Ivy tucked the signed slip into her folder with a strange sense of finality. It wasn't excitement she felt, not exactly fear, either. It was the feeling just before a wave hits when you know you're going under, but you've already chosen not to run. The forest breathed differently. Not like the schoolyard loud and forced. Not like the living room tight with unspoken things. Number? Here. The air moved with rhythm and memory. Pine needles whispered old stories with each step. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in soft, uneven ribbons. It didn't ask anything from her. It just was. Silver Creek Nature Reserve wasn't much. A stretch of oaks and firs. A looping dirt trail that doubled back into itself. A handful of educational signs, half faded from years of sun and disinterest. But to Ivy, it might as well have been another planet. And Coda walked like he remembered it. Not this place specifically, but the wild. The uneven ground, the wind weaving through his fur, the way scents pulled him in like compass needles. Even with the brace clinging to his leg and his limp more pronounced on inclines, Coda carried himself like a sentinel, each paw step deliberate. every ear twitch a decision. Ivy stayed behind the group, just like they told her. Miss Whitmore up front, flanked by chattering students. Every now and then, someone tossed a glance back, half curious, half dismissive. They didn't see what she saw. That was fine. She'd stopped, expecting it. Stay on the trail, someone called. A parent volunteer, maybe. Ivy didn't respond. She wasn't off the trail. Not really. She knelt by a patch of moss, leaf in hand, sketchpad balanced on one knee. Coda stood beside her, watching a squirrel twitch across the bark of a dead maple. He didn't chase. Didn't move. Just listened. She ran the tip of her pencil along the rough outline of the leaf's veins. She added tiny scars to its edge-teeth marks, maybe, or time, or something else entirely. Coda sniffed once, then sat. There were no jokes here. No taunts. No maple mutant or zombie dog girl. Just the quiet crunch of sneakers ahead, and the occasional bird startled by a group too loud to notice what it scared away. Her fingers moved fast, fueled by something quieter than adrenaline but sharper than calm. She turned the page. This time, she drew Codenot as he was, but as he might have been. Stronger, taller, without the brace. Wings, no antlers. Great curling ones, like the stag from the myths her mom used to read. Coda, the shadow guard, the silent king of leaf and fang. You doing okay back there? Miss Whitmore's voice drifted back, accompanied by the crunch of feet, slowing just enough to pretend concern. Ivy nodded, without speaking. Coda did, too, lifting his chin just slightly, like he was in command of this whole path and merely allowing the group to go ahead. Whitmore hesitated, then turned back without another word. Later, they passed a fork in the trail. One path curved left, toward the creek. The other faded right, toward something forgotten. No signs marked the second one, just brambles in a hollow space where ferns had been flattened. Coda stopped. So did Ivy. What is it? She whispered, more out of habit than hope of reply. Coda tilted his head, sniffed, then stepped forward. They walked only a few feet from the main trail, just enough for the air to shift, for the quiet to deepen. And there it was. Adin, collapsed in partly, covered in rotting leaves and clawed earth. The kind of place that had once meant shelter or danger. Large claw marks streaked along the bark of a split log nearby. 3. Deep, not fresh. She crouched, touching the edge of one. Too wide for a raccoon, too high for a dog. Coda, she murmured. But he was already there, nose pressed to the earth. He didn't growl, didn't flinch, just noted it. A scar from a fight long over. Something about it felt familiar, not in the facts but in the ache. Back at the trail, the others called for a water break. Miss Whitmore glanced around and counted heads. Ivy and Coda were already walking back up the slope, hands and paws dusted with loam and memory. They took their water sitting on a log near the back of the group. Coda curled beside her, and Ivy leaned her shoulder into his side. Bet you knew places like this, she whispered. Coda shifted. Not toward her, not away, just present. I don't think they know how to see past the surface, she added, but I'm starting to think that's okay. A blue jay shrieked overhead. Coda's ears twitched, but stayed down, calm, steady, like nothing could shake him. When it was time to move on, Ivy stood first, tied her backpack strap to Coda's brace. Not because she needed to, because it told him, we walked together. His limp was heavier now. The dirt had packed around the hinge. His pads dragged slightly, but he didn't falter. And he didn't once look back. It didn't sound like a scraped knee. It didn't sound like a kid tripping over a root or a bug flying too close. It was the kind of scream that stopped things, that made birds burst from the trees, that made wind pause, like even the forest wasn't sure what came next. Every head turned. The class was halfway through the last loop of the trail, the ranger's voice droning about erosion and lichen. But the scream sliced through all of Itraw and High and Young. Ellie Rose? Someone called. A parent chaperone. Then louder. Ellie Rose. The second grader in the sunflower boots. Gone. Ivy's heart hit her ribs before her feet moved. The rest of the class scattered in confused directions, calling her name, others frozen in place. But Ivy didn't wait. She knew. Coda already did. He was ahead of her before her foot lifted, nose down, ears pinned, the brace barely slowing him. They veered left off trail toward the place where the trees thinned into something sharper. Ivy's shoes slid across pine needles as she pushed through bramble and fern, barely noticing the sting of thorns across her wrist. Then she saw it. Bright yellow boots, one of them half sunken in soft soil. A small shape crouched at the edge of the ravine. Hands braced against a jagged rock. Eyes wide. "Ellie," Ivy gasped. The girl didn't move, didn't speak. She was staring, not at Ivy, at what was behind her. 4 shapes moved like smoke between the underbrush, silent, sinewed. One paused just long enough to lift its head and sniff. Coyotes. Too thin, too close, too curious. One stood near a half-collapsed den, the same one Ivy had passed earlier. She hadn't realized it was still in use. The earth around it was torn now, freshly disturbed. Something had brought them out, and now they were here, sniffing at the line between fear and instinct. Ivy didn't think. She ran. "Get away from her!" she screamed, stumbling through thicket and over root. Ellie turned just as Ivy slid into the space in front of her, arms outstretched like they meant anything. "It's okay," Ivy breathed, trying to keep her voice steady even though her knees shook. "I'm here. Just stay behind me." The largest coyote took a step forward. Coda exploded from the brush like thunder. There was no bark, no growl, just motion. A flash of fur and braced muscle. His body low, eyes locked, teeth bared not in rage but in warning, the kind that came before war. Ivy had never seen him like this. Not even when the boys at school threw pebbles. Not even when he limped across snow with blood on his shoulder months ago. Now, he looked like a line drawn in sand and dared the world to cross it. One coyote turned. Another held ground. The smallest one slunk back toward the shadows. The biggest didn't move. Coda did. A step. Another. A low rumble in his chest, like a distant avalanche. Ellie whimpered behind Ivy. "I want my mom," she whispered, and Ivy's throat clenched so hard she couldn't answer. Her foot shifted on loose gravel. The edge of the ravine was closer than she thought. A coyote's tail twitched. Then Coda charged, and everything split. The scream, the forest, the breath in Ivy's chest. There wasn't time to think. Not for Ivy, not for anyone. Not for anything, just the sound of Coda's brace slamming against rock, the ripple of leaves bursting under claw, and the blur of gold and gray as he met the threat head-on. There are moments in life when sound fractures not into silence, but into layers. The yelp, the growl, the ragged breath of a child trying not to cry. And, somewhere in the center of it all, Coda. He slammed into the largest coyote like a bullet wrapped in fur. The shockwave of his charge sent pine needles airborne, and for a split second, the predators flinched. But then teeth met flesh. The chaos bloomed. Ivy's scream caught in her throat as she dropped to the ground, throwing herself over Ellie Rose. Her own elbows scraped against stone. A hot jolt of pain up her spine, but all she could think was, cover her, cover her. Behind her, Coda was no longer a quiet shadow. He was noise, all snarl and fury. A soldier with nothing left to lose. One coyote darted forward, fast as lightning. Coda twisted just in time, his teeth catching its haunch and dragging it sideways. The creature squealed, kicked, vanished into thickets, but another came. And another. One lunged and found his shoulder. The crack of teeth into muscle echoed like a snapped tree branch. Coda didn't cry out. He pushed. Even as blood began to darken his fur, even as his front leg buckled, he rose like a wave and rammed his body between the coyotes and the girls again. Ivy couldn't see it all, but she felt it. Each thud of impact, each collision, the breathless seconds between. She looked up, barely, and saw his back arched, the metal of his brace catching a flick of sunlight as he turned to guard again. "Coda," Ellie whimpered beneath her. "I want to go home." "I know," Ivy whispered, her voice shaking. "He's getting us there." She pressed her forehead to the top of Ellie's, closed her eyes, and prayed. Somewhere above the canopy, a raven cried out. Somewhere down the trail, boots pounded. But in that pocket of wilderness, Ivy's world had shrunk to blood and breath, and the one creature who had never left her side. And then bang! A single shot split the trees. Loud, cracking, final. The world stilled. One coyote yelped and darted left. Another turned tail, dragging a wounded paw. The one who had bitten, Coda hesitated, then vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only the stink of fear and the rustle of disturbed leaves. Girls! The voice was deep, human. A ranger burst through the brush, rifle still raised, eyes scanning the scene like a war zone. Another adult teacher came stumbling behind him, face pale as driftwood. Coda didn't move. He stood there, shaking, panting, one shoulder soaked in blood but didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the trees, just in case. His legs spread in a wide stance, defending. Only when Ivy whispered, "Coda, it's okay. They're gone," did he shift. Just a little. His head turned. Their eyes met. And then he collapsed. "Coda!" Ivy scrambled up so fast, Ellie nearly tumbled. She pressed her hands to his side, then froze as she saw the bite-a-deep, dark, angry. "No, no, no." The ranger knelt beside her. "We'll get him help, right now." A walkie crackled to life. The words didn't register. All Ivy could hear was Coda's breathing wet, shallow, desperate. She cupped his face. His eyes were still open, still on her. "You stayed," she whispered, "even when it hurt." His tail thumped once against the earth. Slow, soft, like a heartbeat. And Ivy broke. Not into sobs, not loud, just a tremble. The kind that only comes when someone you love chooses pain over leaving you. The tags on her backpack clinked softly as she leaned forward to cradle his head. "Not perfect," she whispered. She touched the one around his neck. "Just brave." Coda stood. Somehow, his legs wobbled beneath him like reeds in river current. But he stood chest, heaving, side torn open, blood dripping in slow, stubborn drops onto the packed dirt. His brace gleamed, scratched now, caked in dust. His left eye was swollen, nearly shut. But he didn't flinch, didn't growl. He just watched. The coyotes were gone. The danger had passed. But he kept watch anyway, like maybe the fear itself was a thing that still needed guarding against. Ivy was on her feet before she realized. Then on her knees beside him, her hands trembled as they hovered near the wound, not daring to touch. The smell of metal and pine filled her throat. "Please stay," she whispered, not loud, not desperate, but like a secret she was almost too afraid to say. "Please stay." Coda turned his head slowly, as if even that cost something. Their eyes locked, and in his, there wasn't pain. There was resolve. The kind Ivy had only seen in movies where heroes didn't know how to quit. His tail moved barely a twitch, and she knew he was trying to tell her, "Still here." Around them, the forest stilled. No wind, no birds, no shuffling from the other students clustered 50 feet back behind the ranger. Even the teacher, Miss Whitmore, looked as though something holy had just unfolded, and none of them had the right to speak yet. One of the boys, Tyler, the one who used to laugh loudest, started to raise his phone like he might film. But he stopped. Something about the moment wouldn't let him. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like witnessing, like watching a flag remain standing after a war. Ivy leaned forward, pressing her forehead to Coda's. Her fingers gripped the fur at his neck, sticky and matted with blood. "You can rest," she whispered, "but not all the way, okay? Just enough." Her voice cracked on the last word. But she didn't cry, because Coda wasn't crying. And that was how they worked, mirroring each other. Even now. Especially now. Behind them, Ellie Rose sat with her knees tucked to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. Her face was blotchy, but her eyes stayed locked on Coda, like maybe he was still holding the monsters back even after they'd run. The ranger spoke softly into his walkie-talkie again. Ivy didn't hear the words. All she heard was breath, her own, Coda's breathin', both shallow, but real, still real. One by one, the rest of the class began to step forward, quiet, careful. They didn't say anything, no cheers, no claps, not even a thank you, just eyes wide and changed. One of the girls, Mia, slowly pulled off her scarf and handed it to the teacher, who knelt and began pressing it gently against Coda's wound. Her hands shook. Ivy didn't move. "Hang on," she kept murmuring. Just hang on. Lucas wasn't there. Not yet. And for the first time since her mom died, Ivy felt that absence like a weight. The ache of wanting someone to fix things and knowing they couldn't. So she became the someone. She curled around Coda like a fortress, like a vow, and the forest let her. No birds, no wind, just blood and silence. And the breath of something sacred passing between a girl and the dog who chose to stay. The inside of the ranger's truck smelled like wet bark and diesel. Ivy didn't notice. She was crouched beside Coda, one hand clamped around the fur at his nape, the other gripping the handle of her backpack like it might anchor her to something solid. The ranger's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as the forest blurred past. Dirt road, then gravel, then asphalt. Coda, Ivy whispered again and again, like his name could plug the bleeding. Coda, stay, please. His eyes flickered. Still awake. Still here. His chest rose. Unsteady. A towel once white was pressed tight against his side. Blood had soaked through 2 layers and was creeping into the seat fabric beneath him. The vet's clinic appeared like an oasis carved into roadside nothing. A squat brick building with peeling green trim and a faded paw print sign. The ranger barely stopped the truck before Ivy flung open the door, she shouted. The receptionist inside turned pale and vanished through a swinging door. Within seconds, a gurney rolled out. 2 techs lifted Coda carefully. Ivy tried to follow them in, but a nurse gently blocked her path. You have to wait, honey. No, Ivy said hoarsely. He waited for me. The woman hesitated, then knelt, eye to eye. We'll fight for him. You hear me? Her voice was firm, real. But you need to breathe. The glass door slammed open behind them. Lucas, pale, wild-eyed, breathless. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He saw Ivy's jeans dark and stiff, with dried blood, her jacket torn, her fists clenched and useless. He crossed the room in 2 steps and pulled her into him like he was the one drowning. She didn't fight it, just folded. For the first time since the ravine, she cried. He didn't ask what happened. He would later. But right now, all that mattered was this. She was safe. Coda wasn't. In the back room, they heard doors swing. Metal instruments clatter. Muffled instructions fast. Clipped. The kind that didn't pretend. The vet emerged minutes later. She was short, gray-haired, all presence and no fluff. Her eyes scanned Lucas, then Ivy. Your dog is a fighter, she began. But it's bad. And Ivy's fingers dug into Lucas's jacket. Puncture wound to the chest. Internal bleeding. 1 lung may be partially collapsed. We're prepping for emergency surgery now. She paused, lowered her voice. I can't promise anything. The clock in the waiting room didn't move. Ivy was sure of it. Lucas sat beside her, one arm always touching her shoulder. Her back, her hand like if he let go, something would unravel. I should have been there, he murmured once. Ivy didn't answer. She was still in the woods, kneeling in blood-soaked pine needles, still hearing the breath between Coda's ribs. She pulled the dog tag from around her neck and gripped it so tightly the edge bit into her palm. Not perfect, just brave. She thought about his limp, his silence, how he never barked, never fought until it mattered. The vet returned an hour later, gloves off, eyes tired. Ivy stood before she spoke. We're not out of the woods, she said softly, but he made it through the worst of it. Lucas exhaled hard like he hadn't breathed since they arrived. Ivy just whispered, thank you, and sat down slowly, her body finally betraying the weight she'd been carrying. Coda wasn't gone. Not yet, and that was enough. For now. It started as a quiet upload. No caption, just a link on a teacher's private Facebook shared after she got off the phone with the district rep. The body cam footage was standard protocol captured from the ranger's chest unit. No edits, no cuts. Just raw forest. Screams, a girl crying. Then the frame catches it. Ivy running, reckless and wild toward the ravine behind her. Coda. The limp is obvious. He's slower than he should be. But the way he throws himself between Ellie and the coyotes, there's no hesitation. No calculation. Just instinct and love. The footage ends in a flurry of fur and dirt and teeth mid-charge. Mid-roar. Somewhere in that blur, the world pauses. By morning, someone had downloaded the clip. By noon, it had made it to Reddit. Three-legged dog saves child from coyotes. By sunset, it was everywhere. Television anchors said his name with practiced sympathy. Coda, the dog with a limp who didn't flinch. Twitter was a thunderstorm. Number Coda the brave. Number 3 legs, no fear. Number not perfect, just brave. Someone even made a t-shirt. Coda's silhouette mid-run, one paw lifted, mouth open, not snarling, but howling, defiant, alive. The school tried to issue a statement. It backfired. Parents quoted it word for word, highlighting the line about service animals staying out of the way. Screenshots spread like wildfire. Silver Creek became a hashtag too. The mayor tried to hold a press conference. Ivy didn't go. Neither did Lucas. They were still at the vet, sitting cross-legged on a waiting room floor where time had become syrupy and slow. Outside, though, reporters lined up. Students started whispering. "Did you hear? They're talking about her on Channel 8. One anchor called her the girl with the dog who waited. Another just said, she didn't hesitate. Neither did he. And somehow, that's what's so devastating. Lucas read the comments aloud at first, trying to keep Ivy distracted. But by the third article, she stopped him. "They don't know him," she said. Her voice was quiet, barely a breath. "They talk like he's a headline." Lucas tucked his phone away. "I know," he said. "But maybe this time the headline helps." Somewhere between 2 IV drips and another blood test, the vet let Ivy tiptoe into the room. Coda was still asleep. His breathing was better now, deep and slow. She sat beside him, tracing the edge of the bandage on his shoulder. "They're calling you a hero," she whispered. His ear twitched just barely, but I knew that before they did. Across town, in bedrooms and classrooms and quiet corners, people watched the video and went still. A teacher who once asked Ivy to leave Coda tied outside paused her grading to replay the footage 3 times. A boy who once called her Maple Mutant deleted his last story post and left a heart emoji on Ivy's drawing account. A woman in Milwaukee donated $200 to the vet clinic anonymously. The note just said, "For the dog that reminded me why I used to believe in good." By the end of the week, donations poured in like rain after drought. Veterans shared photos of their own dogs wounded, retired, and brave in ways no medal ever honored. A little girl in Idaho shaved her head and sent a letter. "I know what it's like to look different. Tell Coda he's my hero." And through it all, Ivy stayed close to the clinic, her sketchbook now half full of pictures of paws and bandages and the soft slope of Coda's head resting on folded towels. She didn't care about interviews or hashtags. But one afternoon, she took a piece of scrap paper and wrote something with a black marker. Big, shaky letters, all caps. She taped it to Coda's cage door. "He's not a miracle. He's just been brave for a long time." The town had always looked the other way when it came to broken things. But now the world was looking straight in. The first letter arrived wrapped around a bag of jerky. No name, just a scribbled note in purple ink. "Tell Coda he's my superhero. Also, he deserves bacon. Real bacon." By the third day, the clinic front desk looked like a post office on Christmas Eve. The staff tried to keep upsorting boxes, opening envelopes, gently stacking dog toys in rainbow-colored bins. Some items were silly. A chewable rubber dragon, a bow-tie collar with stars. Others were deeply, achingly sincere. Ivy came in every afternoon now, not just for Coda, but to help the receptionist unpack the mail. It gave her something to do with her hands, something that wasn't just waiting. One box held a blanket stitched with his name in soft navy thread. Another contained a framed drawing from a first-grade class in Nevada. Coda, all limbs and bravery, his 3 legs planted like a triangle beneath him. One student had drawn Ivy too smiling in the corner, her cane replaced by a sword. Ivy stared at that picture for a long time. Inside the kennel ward, Coda was healing slowly. His wound had been cleaned and stitched. The fur around his shoulder was shaved, revealing the pink slope of scarring skin. He slept most of the day, stirring only when Ivy arrived, perking his ear, flicking his tail once or twice like a tired soldier checking in for duty. But every time she pulled a new letter from her backpack, his eyes brightened. She read them aloud, even the clumsy ones. even the ones with tear-stained corners. "Dear Coda," she said, holding a crumpled page up to his crate. "I've never had a dog, but I think if I ever get one, I want him to be like you. Not because you're perfect, but because you didn't run." Coda let out a long, warm huff, pressing his nose to the bars like he understood every syllable. By Friday, the clinic had to set up a second shelf. People kept sending bones, not cheap ones, but thick marrow bones wrapped in butcher paper, each with little notes taped to them. "Bravery tastes better than fear. For every bite of pain you didn't flinch from, you fought off fear like it was a squirrel." Lucas came by in the evenings to help carry the heavier boxes. He didn't say much, but each time he walked into the clinic, he brought something small. A thermos of hot cocoa for Ivy, a clean blanket, a new rubber mat for Coda's crate. The guilt still hung on his shoulders like wet clothes, but he never missed a day. One afternoon, Ivy spotted it tucked between envelopes and taped inside a small square box. No return address, just a white card. Some medals don't require uniform. Inside sat a tiny gold disc, no larger than a milk cap. Its edges were smooth, but not polished, like it had been carried in a pocket for years. The engraving was simple. No date, no name. Just 8 words. For the one who stood his ground. M. Ivy didn't cry, not really. But her breath hitched as she turned the medal over in her hand. The way you do with something fragile like, if you press too hard, it might vanish. She waited until visiting hours were over, then crept into the ward, sat cross-legged beside Coda's crate, and slipped the medal under his paw. "Here," she whispered. "It's not bacon, but I think it matters." Coda didn't move, but his breathing changed, steady, deliberate, like something inside him understood the weight of it. That night, the vet posted a photo of the crate. Inside, a recovering dog, a scattered pile of treats, and a gold medal resting gently near his foot. The caption read, "He saved someone, and now they're saving him, M." It went viral in under 3 hours. By the weekend, Ivy brought in a journal, pages of notes and scribbles, and taped in pieces of letters she couldn't bear to throw away. She titled the cover, "Stuff You Should Know, Coda." Inside, she wrote things like, "You're the only dog I've ever known who makes silence feel full. Your paws still sound like hope when they touch the floor. I wish people had eyes like yours." And when the news crews finally asked for an interview, Ivy said no. Instead, she took the medal, looped it on a shoelace, and wore it under her hoodie. Let them guess. Let them talk. She didn't need a microphone to tell the world who he was. She just needed him to get better. The cafeteria was quieter than Ivy remembered. Not silent trays, still clattered. Chairs still scraped, but the noise didn't buzz the way it used to. It didn't twist itself into a weapon. It was just background. Like wind brushing through the branches of a tired old tree. She walked in with her backpack slung lower than usual, dragging slightly on one side. Coda wasn't with her today, still recovering, still hooked to fluids and IV drip spit. Ivy swore she could feel his gait in her steps. 3-beat rhythm, pause, resolve. She crossed the room and chose the same table as last time, center row, middle seat. This time, no one whispered. A few heads turned. A few trays paused mid-air. No one laughed. Even Ella Morgan, who once called her cricket crutch, looked away and folded her napkin so slowly it was almost reverent. Ivy unzipped her lunchbox. Peanut butter sandwich, a bruised apple, 1 crumbled granola bar. She was halfway through peeling the apple when someone sat across from her. It was Jackson. He used to be the worst. Not the loudest, but the one who snorted when others joked. The one who pointed just slightly too long. The one who never said anything cruel but never stopped it either. He had a folded piece of paper in his hand. He cleared his throat. "I drew something." Ivy blinked. Her fingers tightened around the apple. Jackson glanced down, then pushed the paper forward with both hands like it might bite him. "It's for Coda, but it's also kind of for you." She opened it. Inside, a comic strip. Black ink on lined paper. 7 squares. The first showed Coda, scars and all, facing down a pack of cartoonish coyotes with ridiculous fangs. The next square had Ivy cape, cane, and all shouting, "Go!" as if commanding destiny. In the middle panel, Coda stood between a stick figure Ellie Rose and danger, tail raised like a banner. One coyote lunged, Another panel. Teeth clashing. Ivy shielding the small figure behind her. The last two squares showed Coda, worn but victorious, with a big bold title sketched across the top in messy, jagged font. Coda, the Guardian, issue number 1. Fear has 3 legs. Ivy stared at it for a long time. Her throat tightened. Not like crying, more like remembering how to breathe. Jackson didn't speak. His ears were red. She could have said thank you. She could have stayed quiet. Instead, she folded the comic gently, tucked it into the front pocket of her backpack, and looked up at him. Her smile was small, but it was real. "Nice work," she said. Jackson's shoulders dropped, like he'd been holding something heavy for days. Maybe he had. He nodded, got up, walked away without saying more. But he didn't slouch, and that, somehow, mattered. Later that day, Ivy passed a bulletin board in the hallway. Someone had taped a photo to the center Coda, wrapped in bandages, one eye half closed but proud. Around it, a circle of blue sticky notes bloomed like petals. "He protected her. 3 legs, 0 fear. Braver than we deserved. Thank you, Coda." Ivy reached into her pocket, pulled out the medal on the shoelace, and ran her fingers along the engraved words again. She didn't speak them aloud. She didn't have to. In homeroom that morning, the classroom buzzed in its usual rhythm half-asleep whispers, the hum of fluorescent lights, the rustle of papers and backpacks. Ivy sat at her desk, second row from the back. Same seat she'd claimed since the beginning of the year. Coda wasn't with her therapy. Dogs weren't allowed in the building yet, but she could still feel the warmth of his presence somewhere beside her, like a steadying pulse under her skin. The door creaked open as Miss Whitmore stepped in, coffee cup in one hand, lesson folder in the other. She scanned the room with her usual gentle gaze, pausing only briefly when her eyes landed on Ivy. It wasn't pity. It wasn't surprise either. It was something quieter, something warmer. A soft nod just enough to say, "I see what you've carried. You don't have to carry it alone anymore." And for the first time since Ivy could remember, she believed it. Not because the bullies had vanished, they hadn't. Not because the whispers had stopped, some still fluttered like moths behind lockers, but because something had changed. It wasn't loud. It didn't come with a dramatic apology in front of the whole school. There was no viral video, no grand moment of justice. Just a quiet shift, like the earth after its first drop of rain. Barely noticeable unless you've been waiting for it, parched and cracked and aching. The change started in art class 2 days prior. It was Liam, the same boy who used to mock the way Ivy stuttered when anxious, who once called her roadkill whisperer after Coda's first school visit. That Liam. He'd walked up to her table with something clenched in his fist, cheeks red, not with anger, but with something like shame. He didn't say anything at first, just dropped a folded piece of paper onto her sketchbook. When she opened it, her breath caught. It was a comic striper of pencil lines, rushed in places, but unmistakably drawn with intention. The first panel showed a girl in rain boots, standing on a hill while kids whispered behind her. The second, her kneeling beside a 3-legged German shepherd. The third, the dog snarling at shadowy figures labeled fear, doubt, and loneliness. The final panel showed the same girl taller, now standing before the same hill. But this time, the whispers were behind her, faded. And she was drawing, big, bold strokes. In the corner, the dog sat with a speech bubble that simply read, "Draw anyway." At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, "I was wrong. I'm sorry. Liam." Ivy hadn't cried. She just nodded, her fingers tracing the edges of the comic. Not because it made everything better, but because it made something possible. Forgiveness, maybe, or just the space for it. Now, sitting in homeroom, she felt it again, that quiet opening. She glanced out the window, where the morning light spilled gold across the sidewalk, and caught a glimpse of herself in the glass. Same freckles, same long sleeves, but something behind her eyes was different. Less guarded, less curled in. When the bell rang and students started to shuffle toward their next class, Ivy stayed seated a moment longer. Miss Whitmore approached, crouched slightly to Ivy's level. "You okay?" she asked, voice like a soft hallway. Ivy hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I think I am." Miss Whitmore smiled, not the wide, performative kind, but the kind you give someone who's finally letting go of the weight they've carried too long. Outside in the hallway, Ivy walked slower than usual, let herself notice things. A girl named Jamie offered her a small wave. 2 sixth graders ran past and giggled when they saw the CODA sticker on her notebook. In the cafeteria, Ivy sat with Lucas for lunch. He was hunched over a notebook, drawing new dog harness designs. He looked up when she sat down. "You okay?" he asked, echoing the teacher. Ivy nodded again. "Yeah, something feels different." Lucas smiled, like he already knew. Later that day, she found herself in the art room again, flipping through her new sketchbook. She turned past the page with CODA's portrait, past the self-portrait labeled "Braver Than I Look," and landed on a blank sheet. She stared at it for a moment, then, slowly, began to draw. This time, it wasn't just her or CODA. It was them all, a group of kids and their dogs. Some kids had braces on their legs. Some had hearing aids or wheelchairs. One had a shaved head from chemo. But every single one of them was smiling. And in the center stood CODA, three-legged, scarred, and proud. A dog who'd walked through fear and never stopped moving. She titled the page, "The Ones Who Don't Run Anymore." When Ivy showed the drawing to Miss Whitmore, the woman took a long, quiet breath. "You're starting to believe in your own story," she said. Ivy blinked. "What do you mean? Before, you told it like it belonged to CODA. Now," she touched the edge of the paper, "now it feels like it belongs to you too." That night, Ivy stood in front of her bedroom mirror, holding the comic Liam had given her. She taped it beside her "Not perfect, just brave" sign. Then she opened her window and let the breeze in. She didn't flinch when thunder rumbled in the distance, didn't shrink when the rain began. Instead, she walked downstairs, where CODA lay curled on the rug by the front door. He looked up, sleepy but alert, and thumped his tail. "Want to come outside?" she whispered. CODA didn't hesitate. Together, they stepped into the rain girl and dog, scarred and stitched and unfinished. Ivy turned her face to the sky and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because she was no longer hiding, and neither was her story. The gymnasium echoed with a strange kind of hush, the kind reserved for memorials or weddings, or that soft moment before thunderclaps. Bleachers creaked beneath students, shifting, whispering, unsure what to expect. Ivy sat near the edge of the first row, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her backpack lay beside her, lighter than usual, without CODA's brace strapped to it. She could feel the emptiness like a phantom weight. On the makeshift stage, a projector buzzed to life. Miss Whitmore stepped up to the microphone, her blouse tucked just a little too neatly, her voice soft but steady. "Today we're going to watch something important," she began. "Something that happened not in a book or a documentary, but just a few miles from here. Some of you were there, some of you weren't, but all of you deserve to know." She nodded to the AV tech, who dimmed the lights. The screen flickered, then bloomed into motion. The body cam footage was shaky at first, sunlight darting through leaves, wind crackling across the mic. Then came the scream, sharp, childlike. It cut through the room like a lightning bolt. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The camera swung to capture a girl Ellie Rose perched too close to a drop-off. 4 lean shadows closing in with hungry patience. And then, CODA, charging forward. No hesitation, just grit and instinct. His body collided with the first coyote, and the forest erupted in chaos. Claws, snarls, blood. Ivy's voice yelling, "No," as she shielded Ellie. Then the sharp pop of a warning shot from the ranger. The screen froze on the moment just after. CODA standing torn and trembling, eyes fixed forward. 3 legs, 1 heart, unshaken. The lights came up slowly. Silence held the room in its teeth. A freshman girl sobbed softly into her sleeve. Even the senior school in their hoodies and AirPods looked away, blinking too fast. Miss Whitmore stepped aside, nodding toward Ivy. It was time. Ivy hadn't planned a speech. Her palms were sweaty. Her heart felt like it had been running laps for hours. But she walked onto that stage with her head high and her spine straight. And when she turned to face the crowd, she didn't look at the principal or the teachers or the reporters in the back row. She looked at the kids who once laughed behind cupped hands. and the ones who never looked her in the eye, and the ones who now wiped away tears they hadn't expected to shed. She took the mic. "I know what some of you called him," she said. Her voice was quiet. It didn't need volume. It had weight. I heard the whispers. Broken dog. Crutch puppy. Limping mutt. She paused, steadying her breath. "I heard what you said about me, too." A shiver passed through the crowd, like wind through dry grass. "But here's the thing," she said. "He wasn't broken. He was just brave before the rest of you noticed. A beat. A shift. Something in the room cracked not with sound, but with understanding. I didn't rescue Coda," Ivy continued. "He rescued me. Every day. He walked beside me even when it hurt him to move. He waited at the door even when I was too tired to get out of bed. He stood in front of danger and chose to stay." She looked down at her hand, at the faint scar from the day she first met him. A scared mess of fur and fear behind a chain-link fence. "We act like heroes wear capes," she said. "But sometimes they wear bandages, and sometimes they limp, and sometimes they're dogs who never needed your approval to be whole." No one clapped at first. They didn't have to. Because Ivy didn't come to be applauded. She came to say something that had waited far too long in the quiet parts of her. When she stepped down, the silence followed her, but it wasn't the cold kind. It was reverent. Miss Whitmore touched her shoulder gently. "You did good, Ivy." She nodded, eyes misty but proud. By the end of the day, the principal announced a new tradition. Once a year, the school would honor everyday guardians, human or otherwise. This year, the first medal would go to Coda. And Ivy? She wasn't a girl who limped into corners anymore. She was the girl who stood on a stage, told the truth, and made a gym full of teenagers cry. The vet tech started leaving the light on for her. Every evening, just after visiting hours technically ended, Ivy would push open the clinic's back door with a quiet creak, slip through the hall like a whisper, and settle onto the blanket beside Coda's recovery kennel. The space smelled like antiseptic and boiled chicken. The hum of machines was constant, like a lullaby made of worry. Coda lay curled in the corner, bandaged and bruised, one side shaved down to bare skin where the surgeons had tried carefully, desperately to rebuild what the coyotes tore apart. A line of stitches stretched from shoulder to hip, angry and raw. A drainage tube blinked red into a plastic bulb taped near his ribs. But he was alive, and his eyes still searched for her the moment she entered. "Hey, soldier," Ivy whispered, kneeling. She passed her fingers gently through the gate's bars, letting him sniff her knuckles. Coda didn't lift his head, but his tail gave a slow, tired twitch like a flag waving in a wind too heavy to carry. Ivy smiled, small but real. She opened her backpack and pulled out her sketchbook, a math packet, and a red apple she knew she wouldn't eat. The corner of her shirt still held a bloodstain no one had managed to scrub out. "I brought you some homework, too," she teased gently, "but you're exempt this week." She sat cross-legged beside the kennel and began solving fractions with her left hand, while her right remained near Coda's paw, close enough he could touch it if he wanted. Some nights he did. Tonight, he just watched her. That was enough. The nurses whispered about her in the break room. "That girl, the one who sits beside the shepherd, the one who brings him letters and reads them out loud like bedtime stories, the one who fell asleep here again on Tuesday." They didn't stop her. How could they? There was something sacred about it. The way she bent toward him, not just in love, but in a kind of borrowed pain. The kind people carried when they'd seen someone they loved torn open in front of them, and still chose to come back the next day. Dr. Moran had warned her. "Coda's walking may never be the same," he said gently. "There's nerve damage. He'll need therapy. Possibly a brace. Possibly wheels." And peace. Ivy had simply nodded, like someone accepting weather. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just went back to the kennel and whispered, "We'll figure it out." Not, "You'll figure it out." We. That word held weight in her chest like a promise carved in bone. One afternoon, Miss Whitmore dropped by with flowers and a card. Ivy thanked her politely, but didn't stand. She stayed kneeling, her head resting lightly on the warm edge of Coda's crate. "I'm sorry I told you to keep him in the back," Miss Whitmore said, voice catching. Ivy didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The days blurred into evenings. Snow began to flirt with the edges of town, frosting windshields and turning the clinic parking lot into a glittering sheet of hush. Still, Ivy came. She brought sketches of things Coda used to chase leaves, squirrels, wind. One night, she traced a drawing of him mid-run, legs stretched like he'd never known pain. She taped it to the glass of his kennel. When she woke the next morning, curled on the floor, arms around her backpack, she saw it. A smear of condensation from Coda's breath beneath the drawing, and beside it barely visible a tail print. Just one soft drag. The text began calling him the miracle dog. The surgeons whispered words like resilient and nerve regeneration and low chance, but not impossible. But Ivy didn't care what they called it. She just watched him dream. Sometimes his paws twitched. Sometimes his ears flicked like they were catching sounds from somewhere far away. And on one rare night when the storm outside made the windows tremble and the whole clinic held its breath, Coda let out a single, muffled bark in his sleep. Ivy looked up from her notebook, eyes wide. She reached through the bars, and this time, he pressed his nose into her palm and didn't move it away. Healing isn't straight. It stumbles, loops, breaks, and rebuilds. It hurts in places no one sees. But some nights, between the smell of iodine and the hum of old light-sit, hums back. And that's when you know, even the broken things still want to stay. The first check came folded in a child's drawing. A crayon rendering of a three-legged German shepherd stood beside a stick-figure girl holding a balloon. Underneath, in wobbly handwriting, were the words, "For other kids who feel alone, like me. Thank you, Coda. M." Lucas stared at it for a long time before unfolding the attached note. It wasn't much, 17.3, $2 and change, mostly quarters, but it lit the fuse. By the end of the week, the donations eclipsed 5 figures, then 6. Local businesses offered space. National shelters sent crates. Therapists reached out with cautious curiosity. And Lucas' hands shaking, eyes still raw from everything they'd nearly lost breathed in deep for the first time in weeks. He knew what needed to happen. "Hearts and Hounds," the sign read. Hand-painted and hung above the front porch of the old Hartley farmhouse, gifted by the town council with unanimous votes and misty eyes. Underneath, etched into weathered wood, a logo. Coda's face half in shadow, one ear nicked, eyes alert and unflinching. The scar on his cheek made no attempt to hide itself. They had offered to smooth it out, retouch the artwork, make it more friendly. Lucas refused. "He's not a mascot," he'd said. "He's proof." The mission was simple. Connect rescue dogs many with trauma of their own, with children who'd been through what no one their age should. Children like Ivy. Like Ellie Rose, who still flinched when branches snapped. Like Trevor, age 9, who hadn't spoken since the car crash, took his mother and left him in a back brace. Like Naomi, whose nights came with screams and locked closets. Each was paired with a dog the world had nearly given up on. Word spread faster than any campaign Lucas could have afforded. There were no ads-only stories. Shared, reposted, echoed across threads and comment sections with hashtags like #HeartsandHounds, #Coda the Brave, and #NotBrokenJustBrave. Within a month, there were over 200 applications. From Kansas to Kentucky, from military families to foster care workers, from teachers and social workers, and even a retired veteran who said he had more silence in his house than he knew what to do with. The first match was made on a Thursday afternoon. Naomi met Junie, a shepherd mix with anxiety so bad she'd chewed her crate to splinters and hadn't wagged her tail in months. They didn't speak, just sat, cross-legged and cross-pawed, staring at each other across a patch of grass while volunteers held their breath. Then Naomi reached out, slow and trembling, and June didn't flinch. The tail didn't wag. Not yet, but it didn't tuck either. Ivy was there for the launch, her backpack slung across one shoulder, a drawing poking out of the side. She didn't speak much during the speeches. Not when the mayor called Coda a symbol of resilience. Not when the cameras clicked. Not even when the first plaque was unveiled. But when Lucas knelt down beside her and asked if she wanted to help cut the ribbon, she nodded. Together, they lifted the oversized scissors. Coda sat between them, leg in a brace, tail thumping unevenly against the porch. And when the ribbon fell, the crowd didn't cheer. They clapped, soft and long and reverent. like they were blessing something. The ripples weren't loud. They were quiet. A boy who hadn't held a pencil in weeks sat cross-legged in the sun-drenched corner of the barn. His hand trembled slightly, uncertain, unused to trying. But something about today felt different. He stared at the piece of paper in front of him for a long time before slowly writing out 5 block letters in green crayon, BENJI. That was his therapy. Dog's Nami, floppy-eared mutt with a patch over one eye and the patience of a saint. The boy looked up, eyes flicking nervously to where Benji lay nearby, tongue lolling, watching without pressure, just being. The boy gave a tiny nod. It was the first time he'd written anything voluntarily since the accident. No one interrupted. Ivy saw it from across the barn, pressed her hand to her chest, and said nothing. Moments like that, like him, deserved silence. Across the way, a girl in a sunflower yellow raincoat was curled beside her rescue hound, a brindle-coated shepherd mix with half a tail and eyes like dusk. Outside, the sky had darkened. The wind stirred the leaves. And then came the thing she feared most. Rain. Her mother, waiting in the car, instinctively reached for the umbrella but froze as she watched through the barn window. The girl didn't scream this time, didn't bolt. Instead, she whispered something only the dog could hear, and buried her face into the dog's neck as the first raindrops tapped against the barn's tin roof like a heartbeat. The dog didn't move. He stayed with her. Steady. Anchored. The storm passed outside, and maybe a little inside too. And every time someone new asked Lucas where it all began, how this place, this movement, this magic had started, he'd just point. Not to a blueprint. Not to a mission statement. But to the side of the old red barn. To the mural. It was simple, raw. Painted by a local artist who'd lost her son to PTSD and found her way back to color through a dog with eyes like memory. The mural showed Coda not how he died, but how he lived. 3 legs, stitched shoulder, fur thinned around the scar tissue. One ear slightly bent, and his head held high, not out of pride but something deeper, a kind of quiet defiance, the dignity of someone who'd been through hell and come back not beautiful, but brave. There was no cape, no medal, no golden light, just scars, and the gaze of someone who knew, who understood what it meant to walk through fire, to limp through fear, and still move forward, still protect, still love. Beneath him, in soft paint strokes, were the words Ivy had whispered the night before the mural was unveiled. Not perfect, just brave. The mural had become a kind of lighthouse. Kids would walk up to it and touch the rough texture of the brushstrokes like it held a secret. Volunteers caught adults crying in front of it more times than anyone could count. Sometimes, people came just to sit in its shadow, to remember someone, or something, or to feel like maybe they weren't as alone as the world made them feel. Hearts and Hounds wasn't fancy. There were still broken boards on the porch. Some therapy sessions happened on hay bales. But none of that mattered. What mattered was what was happening here, who was happening here. The girl who'd once refused to speak, unless screamed, now helped teach younger children how to brush a dog gently, like a whisper. The boy with selective mutism now read out loud, one sentence at a time, to a patient old lab named Cinnamon. A teenager who used to flinch at every sudden noise had learned to sleep with her dog curled beside her chest, heartbeat sinking to heartbeat. And always there was Coda. He didn't move like he used to. His steps were slower now, sometimes stiff. But whenever new kids arrived nervous, fidgety, eyes darting, Coda would limp forward to greet them first. He didn't bark. He didn't crowd. He'd just sit, close enough for them to reach out if they wanted. Often, they did. Something about him made it easier. He was living proof that broken didn't mean less. That maybe healing doesn't come from pretending nothing happened, but from walking anyway, scars and all. Lucas remembered one afternoon, months ago, when Ivy had asked if they could add her to the mural too. He'd looked at her freckles, healing knees, eyes that had seen more than any child should, and nodded. She drew herself in chalk first, beside Coda, a little shorter, wearing her old rain boots, holding a leash that wasn't taut, but soft, like a thread between them. Above them both, she'd written, "Real heroes don't always roar." Sometimes, Lucas stood alone in the barn at dusk, just staring at that wall. He thought about how far they'd come. From the night Ivy had brought home a dog everyone else had turned away, to the parade where Coda rode beside her like royalty, to the day they received 143 letters in a week from parents asking if Hearts and Hounds could help their child, to the boy who knocked at their door and said, voice trembling, "My dog's a little broken too. Is this where the heroes live?" Lucas still didn't have all the answers, but he didn't need them. Because he had that mural, because he had Ivy's laugh echoing in the field, he had the pitter-patter of mismatched footsteps on the gravel, and he had the quiet sigh of Coda, sleeping with his head near Ivy's pillow, tail thumping once as if to say, "Still here." Scars, dogs, children who didn't believe they belonged anywhere, but now they did, because once a girl took home a dog no one wanted, and the world followed them home. Maple Hollow smelled like cider and pine. The sidewalks overflowed with flannel shirts and paper cups, cinnamon steam rising into the cool morning air. Pumpkins lined every porch. Leaves in yellows and reds danced like confetti on the breeze. Kids ran in uneven zigzags, chasing candy tossed from fire trucks and scout troops. It was the town's favorite Dayfall parade day. But this year, something was different. This year, the silence came first. No brass band kicked off the march. No school cheer squad boomed a chant. Instead, the first thing that rolled down Main Street was a wagon hand-built, low to the ground, padded in quilted fleece. Straw bales lined the sides. Bright orange mums bloomed at the corners. And sitting in it, regal as any king, was Coda. Three-legged, banded shoulder, metal on his collar. A wreath of marigolds circled his paws. Beside him sat Ivy, hands folded, face still, her free hand resting gently on Coda's back like it had always belonged there. The banner stretched above them read in deep, looping letters, "Different isn't less." The street didn't cheer. Not yet. People stood. Hats came off. Cameras lowered. A few clapped once, twice before their hands froze mid-air, caught between celebration and reverence. Because this wasn't the kind of parade that asked for noise. This was the kind that asked you to feel. Coda lifted his head as they passed the school. His eyes scanned the sidewalk like he always did, dun ear twitching toward every small sound, like he hadn't forgotten that the world could shift in a heartbeat. Kids waved. A few had matching bandages wrapped around their arms in solidarity. Ellie Rose, standing near the front with a paper sign that said, "Thank you for saving me," began to cry. Not the loud kind, the kind that falls without sobs, quiet tears that know the shape of gratitude. Her mother held her shoulders, but didn't pull her back. Some feelings are meant to be felt in public. Miss Whitmore walked behind the wagon, her whistle around her neck but unused. Lucas walked alongside her, hand gripping the corner of the banner, eyes never leaving Ivy and Coda. A group of veterans followed, not as a separate float, but quietly and deliberately, keeping pace. One of them, grizzled, cane in hand, saluted as Coda passed. His lower lip trembled when Coda nodded back. At the town square, where the parade traditionally ended with balloons and bluegrass, they stopped instead beneath the clock tower. A microphone was waiting. Ivy didn't use it. She just stood up in the wagon, brushed a bit of hay from her lap, and looked out across the crowd. Somewhere, a drum line hushed, mid-beat. "He never asked to be anyone's hero," she said, voice steady. "He just saw someone smaller than him in danger, and stood there anyway." She paused, hand still on Coda's fur. "He limps now, and sometimes his dreams make him whimper. But he stood his ground, and that made everything else possible." No one breathed, not even the birds. Then, slowly, someone clapped. One person, then another, until the whole square rang not with shouts or whoops, but with applause that felt like rain on dry earth. Measured, honoring. Somewhere in the crowd, an old woman whispered, "Lord bless that dog." A boy with a speech delay signed thank you with both hands. And Ivy sat back down beside him, pressed her forehead to his neck, and closed her eyes. They didn't stay for the pie-eating contest. Didn't need to, because on that day, in that town, the definition of brave had changed. Not into something louder, but into something deeper. Into a scarred dog, in a flower-draped wagon, and a girl who believed in him before anyone else did. The parade had ended, but no one left. People milled like autumn leaves, stirred by a gentle wind, slower now, quieter. The streets weren't lined anymore with noise or novelty. They were lined with something else. Recognition. Ivy helped Coda down from the wagon. He moved gingerly, shoulders still stiff, scar catching the light like a seam of silver against dark fur. But he stood, 3 legs, firm, tail low, but wagging. People didn't rush. They came one by one. A woman with silver-streaked hair approached first. Her own dog limping beside her ran old retriever missing a rear leg, just like Coda. She crouched without words, gently letting her dog and Coda sniff nose to nose. "I wanted him to meet the only other dog who made me cry on a Tuesday," she whispered, eyes shining. Ivy smiled, small and tired, but real. She knelt beside Coda and gave him a quiet scratch behind the ear. Then came the boy. He didn't say his name, and Ivy didn't ask. She recognized him, the one who'd tripped her once on the way to class, who'd whispered "charity case" under his breath when he thought no one was listening, who'd made a paper puppet of a 3-legged dog and barked at her behind the lunchroom door. Now he just walked up with a hand-drawn sign folded in quarters, eyes fixed on his shoes. I drew this for him," he mumbled, not meeting her gaze. He held it out, arms trembling. A sketch of Coda, cape trailing behind, with the words in crayon, "Brave is different." She took it, folded it again with care, and offered the only thing he truly needed. "I know," she said. "It takes time." The boy nodded once, then stood beside her. Not behind, not ahead, just beside. Lucas stood back, leaning against the base of a lamppost. His arms were crossed, but his fingers tapped restlessly against his sleeve. His eyes tracked Ivy like he still expected her to vanish. He hadn't cried in front of her since the vet. Now he blinked harder than usual. When she finally met his gaze, she didn't wave. She just mouthed, "Thank you." And that broke him. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and laughed under his breath. She was thanking him. More people came. Kids in wheelchairs. A man with a scar down his cheek who hadn't come to a parade in years. A mother who knelt beside Ivy and said softly, "My daughter talks now, because she saw your video and said, 'If Coda can, I can.'" 100 quiet miracles blooming from one moment of wild courage. Coda lay beneath a shade tree at the edge of the square, nose tucked near his paws, chest rising slow. A little girl placed a tiny felt heart by his side. He didn't stir but his tail flicked once, as if he knew. The town didn't change overnight. But that day, something shifted. Judgment gave way to understanding. Cruelty made room for remorse. And in the space left behind, a girl and her dog stood not as a story everyone pitied, but as something stronger. A reminder. That broken doesn't mean lesser. And brave isn't always loud. The sun was down when they got home. Not just dipped, but gone folded behind the trees like a worn-out flag after a long parade. The porch light buzzed softly above them. Ivy opened the door with one hand, the other resting gently on Coda's back. He hesitated on the threshold, not because of pain, because he always did. He never crossed without permission, as if each time might be the last he was allowed inside. Ivy knelt beside him, stroked the fur between his ears. "This is home, Coda," she said softly. "Always has been." He leaned into her hand and stepped over. Upstairs, her room hadn't changed. Still a mess of books and constellation stickers peeling at the edges. But it felt different now, like it had absorbed the weight of everything that had happened and decided to settle into something quieter. Ivy spread out a thick blanket beside her bed. She didn't need to call him Coda, curled onto it, limbs tucked close, breathing slow and even. The stitches on his side caught the light. A metal still hung on the bedpost, gently clinking against wood every time the wind nudged the window. She sat beside him, cross-legged, her fingers tracing the edge of his blanket. "You saved me," she whispered. Coda's ear twitched. "I don't just mean the woods," she said, voice catching slightly. "I mean, before, when no one saw me, when I thought maybe being invisible was easier." Coda blinked slowly, then rested his head on her ankle. "I used to think having something broken meant you had to hide it," she continued. "But now I think maybe it just means you understand people better." He didn't answer, of course, but his tail thumped once against the floor. That was enough. The house was quiet. Downstairs, Lucas had left the porch light on and the kettle half full. A cup with her name on it sat by the sink. Upstairs, Ivy lay down, blanket pulled halfway over her knees. She left the floor lamp on, casting a soft golden glow across the room. She turned on her side, facing Coda. He looked at her through half-lidded eyes. One long exhale. She reached down, letting her fingers brush against his fur. "You can rest now," she whispered. "It's my turn." Coda closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't stir. Didn't lift his head at the creak of the floorboards or the whine of a settling house. Didn't brace for the next call to action. He just rested. The kind of rest only heroes get after they've done more than anyone expected, for longer than anyone knew. And Ivy, with her arm dangling off the bed, stayed that way until sleep found her too. The gravel lot in front of Hearts and Hounds crackled beneath tires and small shoes. The sign, painted in soft hues of blue and gold, creaked gently in the morning wind. Below the name, a simple silhouette, a girl and a three-legged dog, side by side. Ivy stood at the gates, clipboard in hand, but it wasn't for taking notes. It was for something to hold, something to anchor her trembling fingers. Because this morning was different. This morning, they were opening the doors to children like her. The first car pulled up just after 8. A mother stepped out first, then gently helped her son unbuckle. He was maybe 7, wearing thick leg braces that squeaked slightly with every step. He kept his head down, clutching a battered plush lion to his chest. Coda limped forward, calm and sure. The boy froze, then stared. Coda stopped a few feet away and sat, tongue lolling, eyes soft. The boy whispered something only his mother heard. She nodded, wiping a quick tear. "You can go say hi," Ivy said gently, kneeling beside Coda. "He's already your friend. He just hasn't told you yet." The boy shuffled closer. Coda didn't move. When the boy reached out a trembling hand and touched his head, the dog leaned into it like it was the most natural thing in the world. The lion dropped to the dirt. For the rest of the morning, that boy never left Coda's side. They came in quiet pairs and uncertain footsteps. A girl with a speech impediment who clutched her words like fragile glass. A twin Perron with a cochlear implant, the other with scars no one asked about. A tall boy who flinched at loud noises and couldn't meet anyone's gaze but sat cross-legged in the grass, letting Coda nudge his hand every so often. No one made them talk. No one told them to smile. But they did slowly. Awkwardly. And then like they'd been waiting to. By late morning, Ivy found herself standing in the middle of the field, Coda at her side, surrounded by laughter that didn't sound forced. Some of the kids were brushing, the smaller rescued dogs others were sketching, tossing tennis balls, or just lying in the grass, letting the quiet be enough. And Coda? He was everywhere, letting kids rest against him, wobbling toward the ones still hanging back, not doing tricks, just being. His limp no longer stood out. It was simply part of him, like the kids' braces, or stutters, or the long pauses before they answered. Later, Ivy sat under the shade of a willow tree, legs stretched out, clipboard forgotten. Coda flopped beside her, head resting near her foot, breathing slow. A girl with a missing front tooth and a nervous smile approached, holding a crumpled drawing. She didn't speak, just handed it to Ivy and pointed to the picture. It was Coda, 3 legs, smiling, tail mid-wag. Above his head, a crayon heart, and the word hope. Ivy blinked hard and hugged the drawing to her chest. "Thanks," she whispered. The girl just grinned and ran back toward the others. Coda stirred beside her, lifting his head as a breeze rolled through the trees. Ivy reached down and scratched behind his ear. "You're not just a dog," she murmured. "You're a mirror. They see you and realize they were never broken, just waiting for someone like you." His tail thumped once in reply, and around them, the field buzzed with small footsteps and big hearts, finally learning they had space to run. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. No fanfare, no return address. Just Lucas's name, written in careful block print across a weathered envelope, and a postmark smudged by rain. He almost didn't open it, thought it was another thank you note from a parent, or maybe a local business wanting to sponsor Hearts and Hounds. But there was something about the handwriting deliberate, like someone who hadn't written in a while but needed every word to count. Inside, one folded sheet. Cream paper, creased down the middle, and a photograph that fluttered to the floor as he opened it. Lucas picked it up first. It was Coda, younger, 2 ears high, stance proud, eyes sharp as flint. Beside him, A man in fatigues crouched, arm around the dog's shoulders, smile tugging at his lips but not quite reaching his eyes. On the back, Bravo Unit, Cordoba Raid, Dos Mil Kims. Lucas sat down hard. Then he read, "To whoever has him now? If you're reading this, it means Coda survived. I didn't think he did. None of us did. That last mission went to hell. The house was rigged. 2 men didn't make it out, and when the smoke cleared, Coda was gone. We called his name until our voices cracked, but there was nothing. The official report listed him Kia. I didn't even get to bury him, just a folded flag and a plaque that said service with honor. But if you have him, if he's still alive, then there's something you should know. He saved my life. Not metaphorically, literally. A cartel runner had me in a chokehold. Knife out. I thought it was over. But Coda, he came out of the shadows like a ghost. Took the guy down with 3 swift moves. Got cut across the leg, but didn't stop until I could breathe again. He wasn't just trained. He was driven. Like he knew his job wasn't just about commands. It was about people. Keeping them whole, even when it cost him. I named him Coda myself, short for Dakota, the state I was stationed in when I started over. It means friend in Sioux. Fitting, right? If he's with you now, take care of him. He's seen more than most, and he'll never stop giving, even when he has nothing left. Tell him I remember. JM, former handler, U.S. Army K-9 unit. Lucas sat for a long time after the last line, letter trembling in his fingers. The past came alive in a wave of color and blood and loyalty. And suddenly everything the way Coda froze it loud pops. How he scanned rooms like a soldier in a foreign land. The quiet dignity in his posture made sense. He hadn't just been a stray with a limp and a scarred snout. He'd been someone. A protector. A partner. A hero before anyone in Maple Hollow had ever clapped for him. That night, Lucas walked down the kennel hall slower than usual. Most of the dogs were asleep, curled in their beds or twitching in dreams. But at the far end, in the pen with the extra padding and Ivy's blanket draped over the gate, Coda was awake. He lifted his head, ears flicking as Lucas approached. No bark, no whine, just that look. That deep, knowing look like he'd heard the letter from across the room. Lucas knelt and pressed his forehead against the gate. "You didn't just save a town," he whispered. "You saved a man. Probably more than one." Coda blinked, then leaned forward, resting his chin where Lucas's hand now lay. Lucas slid the photograph between the metal bars. "He remembered you," he said quietly. "And I think part of you never forgot him." Coda didn't move, but a soft sound escaped his throat almost like a hum. And for a fleeting second, his tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the moon hung low. Inside, the weight of truth settled into the wall's quiet. Undeniable and full of reverence. Coda wasn't just a rescue. He was the rescuer all along. The barn had been cleaned spotless. Hay swept to the corners. Twinkle lights strung across the beams like stars that refused to leave with the morning. Outside, a painted sign hung crooked over the archway. Hearts and Hounds, First Graduation, MSO. The letters were uneven. The paint smudged. But that only made it more beautiful because it had been made by the kids themselves. Inside, folding chairs lined both sides of the aisle. Nervous parents shifted in their seats. Volunteers fiddled with clipboards. Lucas stood by the podium, his throat thick, a stack of certificates in hand that shook just slightly when he exhaled. But everyone was waiting for the same thing. And at exactly 10 a.m., the barn doors opened. First came Ivy. She wore a blue dress creases, still fresh, where it had been folded in the closet too long and held a bouquet of dandelions. Not bought, picked, roots and all. Beside her, Coda walked slow but steady, his gait still uneven, his hind legs stiff, but his head was held high. His scars untouched by makeup, unapologetically seen, were the first thing the children clapped for. Ivy guided him to the front row, then knelt beside him. "You ready?" she whispered. Coda's ear twitched. His tail gave a single, solemn wag. They both looked forward as the first name was called. "Caleb Morrison and Rocket, please step forward." A pause, a small intake of breath. Then a boy, maybe 8 or 9, stood. His shirt was tucked in too tight, his shoes too new, and his hands trembled at his sides like the words inside him had nowhere to go. But beside him, A little beagle with one eye let out a confident bark and nudged his calf gently. Rocket wore a red bandana that said, "I hear with my heart," in crooked, glittery letters. The audience clapped. Caleb flinched, then looked at Rocket. The beagle tilted his head. It was enough. Caleb stepped forward, slow, one foot in front of the other, the barn echoing with each small but defiant step. Lucas met him at the front. "You've done it," he said, kneeling so they were eye level. "You didn't let fear win. You and Rocket, you're family now." Caleb blinked, then swallowed, and then, like something cracked gently open inside his chest, said, "Thursday, thank you," loud enough for everyone to hear. A murmur rippled through the barn. Ivy's hand flew to her mouth. Rocket wagged his tail so hard it slapped Caleb's leg. Someone began to cry in the back row. Caleb reached for the certificate and held it with both hands like it was made of glass. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was reverent. After all the clapping, after the photographs and cider and gluten-free cookies from Miss Whitmore's kitchen, Ivy stayed behind. Coda was tired. He lay beside her, breathing heavy but calm, one paw on her shoe like always. She watched Caleb giggle as Rocket tried to chase bubbles from a wand. The boy who once couldn't say a word was now laughing without needing any. Lucas stepped beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes glassy. "I thought today would feel like an ending," he said. Ivy shook her head. "It doesn't." He looked down at her. "What does it feel like?" "A beginning," she said. Before they closed the barn, Ivy pinned something to the wooden wall just behind the podium. It was a new plaque, carved carefully, unevenly. "Hearts and Hounds, Class of 1, but never alone." Beneath it, she taped a photo, faded but fierce. Coda, in uniform, younger, unbroken. And now, finally, home. The chairs in Maple Hollow Library were mismatched. Some creaked. A few still bore faint crayon marks from story hour. The air smelled like old pages and peppermint tea from the librarian's thermos. It was cozy, imperfect, real. The poster on the bulletin board outside read, "Ivy Whitmore, guest speaker on healing, courage, and canines. Tuesday, 6 p.m. Everyone welcome." They came quietly at first. Teachers, parents, children holding nervous hands, an elderly veteran in uniform, a boy with a cochlear implant, a girl with 2 prosthetic fingers. Some knew Ivy, some only knew of her, but all of them had heard about the dog. And there he was, Coda curled, at the front of the room. He wasn't the kind of dog that demanded attention. Not anymore. He simply was. Scarred face resting on crossed paws, one ear slightly cocked, listening. The very presence of him softened the edges of people who didn't know they'd come here carrying weight. Ivy stood beside him, clutching a notebook. She was taller, now not in inches, but in steadiness. Her voice had lost its tremble. Her eyes, no longer looking for a way out of a room, now looked for the people hiding inside it. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she bent down and gently placed her palm on Coda's back. His tail thumped once. Then she stood and began. "I used to think silence made me weak," she said. A few people leaned forward. Someone cleared their throat. "When the bullying started, I didn't fight back. I shut down. I believed what they said. That being different meant I had to hide. That broken meant worthless. That scars were something to cover." She paused. Let the quiet stretch, but not suffocate. "But then I met someone," she continued, voice softer now. "He had more scars than I could count. On the outside, on the inside. And still, he showed up. Even when it hurt. Even when it cost him everything." A murmur. Someone whispered, "Coda." Ivy smiled. "He didn't have to speak to be brave," she said. "He didn't need perfect legs to stand between me and danger. He didn't care how anyone saw him. Only what was right." She looked down. Coda raised his head. Eyes met. "For a long time," Ivy said, "I thought bravery was loud, dramatic, heroic in a way that only existed in comic books. But real bravery is quiet. It limps. It scars. It stays, even when it's afraid." There was no applause yet, only stillness. The kind that wraps itself around the spine and tells the heart, listen close, this matters. She turned to the audience. I came here tonight to tell you something I wish someone had told me sooner. Something simple. She took a breath. Then, clearly, as if every word was stitched into her chest, scars don't make us less. They remind us we got through something. The room didn't erupt. It sighed. The kind of collective exhale that only comes when truth has finally been spoken aloud. After the talk, they didn't rush to leave. Children wandered up to pet Coda gently, one by one. A boy with a burn across his cheek knelt and whispered something only Coda could hear. The dog didn't move, just pressed his head softly into the boy's chest. An old woman slipped Ivy a note. It read, My son died in combat. His dog came home. He never looked anyone in the eye until now. Lucas, standing in the back, wiped his glasses on his sleeve. Twice. That night, as the library lights dimmed and the room emptied, Ivy sat cross-legged beside Coda's bedroll near the podium. He was proud of you tonight, Lucas said, crouching next to them. She glanced up. Who? Whoever trained him first, Lucas replied. Wherever he was before Maple Hollow, I bet he hoped someone like you would find him. Ivy brushed a hand over Coda's shoulder. The scar there no longer looked like damage. It looked like a landmark, a story with teeth. I didn't find him, she said. We found each other. Coda's tail gave a small thump. And in that library with its creaky chairs, dog hair on the rug, and words still echoing in the walls, something gentle settled in the space between past and present. Not an ending, but something close to peace. It was raining gently the evening Ivy found the courage to open a new sketchbook. Not a storm, not a downpour, just that soft kind of drizzle that taps on the window like a lullaby. Maple Hollow had quieted for the night, streetlights casting halos over puddles, the hush of healing folding itself into the corners of every home. In Ivy's room, everything felt familiar but changed. The posters on her wall were still slightly askew, her books stacked in uneven towers, and the scent of lavender from the diffuser still lingered in the air. But her desk, that was different. Tonight, it wasn't a surface for homework or half-drunk mugs of cocoa. It was a ceremony. She ran her fingers over the leather-bound journal thicker than the old one, with clean, unspoiled pages and a spine that hadn't yet learned to bend. On the cover, in silver foil, the words, Real Heroes. She took a breath, then opened to the first page. Her hand didn't tremble as much as it used to. The lines came slowly, but with clarity, a muzzle scar. One soft ear flopped slightly forward. Eyes deep, unreadable to the world, but not to her. It was Coda. Not just a dog. Not just a story, but a survivor, a protector, a beginning. She added shading to the part of his back where the fur never quite grew back. Then paused because it wasn't a flaw, it was truth. Below the drawing, she wrote in blocky all-caps letters, Page 1, Coda, saved me first. The pencil lingered above the next page. She almost turned the book closed, but something in her chest, a hum, a whisper, a warmth nudged her forward. And then she began to sketch again. Not a dog this time. A girl. Braces on her teeth. Hair always a little too messy. Eyes that didn't always meet others, but could hold galaxies when they did. She drew herself. This version of Ivy didn't hide behind sleeves or silence. She stood not perfectly. Not without bruises, but with her chin up. Like she had earned something. Because she had. Below the image, in smaller print, she wrote, Page 2, Ivy, still here. A quiet knock came from the door. Lucas peeked his head in. You drawing? She nodded. He stepped inside, holding something behind his back. I found these while cleaning out the office at Hearts and Hounds, he said. Thought maybe you'd want them. He revealed a weathered wooden plaque, edges rough, but the metal tag in the center gleamed even now. The one Ivy had tied to Coda's harness the day everything changed. It read, Not perfect, just brave. She stared for a long moment, then smiled. He hated that thing. Lucas chuckled. He chewed it twice. Third time I gave up. He crossed to the wall above her desk. With a small hammer and nail, he fastened the plaque to the spot above her sketches. Centered. Unmissable. There. he said, stepping back. Now bravery's got a place. Ivy looked at it. The way the light caught on the metal, the way her own reflection flickered faintly in its surface. I'm going to fill this book, she said quietly, with every face that tried anyway, with stories that didn't end when they broke. Lucas watched her. I think Coda would have liked that. He's on page 1, she said. He'll always be page 1. Lucas reached down and ruffled her hair the way only older brothers can get away with. I'm proud of you, he said. She blinked quickly, then went back to shading the shadows beneath her chin. I know. Outside, the rain let up. Inside, Ivy leaned over a blank pagone of many still to come. The sketchbook waited. So did the world. The morning was quietone of those rare, still hours when the house seemed to breathe with its own memory. Ivy had just finished feeding Coda, who now lay curled on his rug by the front window, his back leg twitching slightly in sleep. The late autumn sun filtered through the curtains, dust motes dancing like little spirits in the golden light. She was sketching again. A new entry. A girl in a wheelchair holding a leash. The dog beside her stubby tail. Lopsided grin looked a lot like Murphy, one of the first rescues at Hearts and Hounds. Coda stirred, ears twitching, before Ivy even heard it. A knock. Not loud, just tentative. Like whoever stood there was unsure they had the right place. Ivy blinked, set down her pencil, and padded barefoot across the hardwood floor. She opened the door, and there he was. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, thin, with sandy hair that fell across his forehead, and a nervous energy that made his fingers fidget at the hem of his sleeve. He wore a hoodie too big for his frame, and one pant leg rolled up awkwardly to accommodate the metal brace strapped to his knee. Behind him, a golden retriever with a cloudy eye and a crooked gait waited patiently. Its tail wagged once, uncertainly. The boy looked up. I saw the article, he said, voice barely above a whisper. The one about Coda, and Ivy, and this place. He paused, eyes shifting to the ground. My dog's a little broken too, he added, fingers curling into a fist. But he's still good. I swear. He finds me when I panic. He just knows. I didn't teach him. He just does. Ivy didn't say anything yet, just listened. The boy's voice cracked. Is this where the heroes live? The world held its breath. Inside, Coda had risen slowly. He limped to the doorway, his scarred face catching the sunlight, his body worn but proud. He stood beside Ivy, gaze calm, steady. The retriever stepped forward, ears perked, tail wagging again. The boy followed. Ivy looked from Coda to the boy, then down to the dog who waited at the steps as if asking permission. And something in her softened not in pity but recognition. She opened the door wider. Come in, she said, voice firm but warm. We saved a spot. The boy blinked. Really? Coda did, Ivy replied. A long time ago. The boy stepped over the threshold, the retriever trotting behind him. Coda moved slowly, but with purpose head lowered slightly, tail swaying. He touched noses with the retriever. Just a moment. No growl, no dominance, just understanding. I'm Will, the boy said. Ivy. I know, Will said shyly. From the video at school. They showed it after the parade. Ivy smiled. You live in town? Just moved here. He nodded. Mom says we needed a fresh start. I think she meant me. Coda limped back to his rug. The retriever followed, curling beside him like it had always known how. Ivy gestured to the couch. Want to sit? Will nodded without a word, his fingers tightening briefly around the strap of his fraying backpack before he let it drop beside the couch. The soft thud it made was barely audible, but Ivy felt it. Felt it in that silent way you feel when someone's weight has finally found a place to land. He sat slowly, like someone who wasn't sure if the cushions would hold, or worse, if the welcome might vanish the moment he got too comfortable. Ivy didn't rush him. She didn't say make yourself at home, because some kids had heard that too often from people who didn't mean it. Instead, she walked to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of lemonade, careful to set one on the coffee table with enough space between them that Will wouldn't feel cornered. Chance the golden retriever, with the healing eye spatted in after him. He didn't hesitate like Will did. He moved with that rare grace some dogs have. The kind that seems to say, I know this is good. I know this is safe. His soft golden fur brushed against the rug as he laid down beside Coda, who stirred just enough to lift his head and bump noses. Then, in a gesture so gentle it felt like a whisper, Chance rested his chin on Coda's front paw. Ivy stood still for a moment, not out of surprise but reverence. Some things didn't need words. Some welcomes happened in silence, dog to dog, soul to soul. She glanced down at the coffee table where her sketchbook lay open. A pencil rested diagonally across the page she'd started the night before. The last image she'd drawn was of Coda watching a rainbow his ears perk toward hope. She turned the page. Fresh, blank, waiting. And then, with the same careful attention she'd used to fold origami notes as a child when she had no one to talk to, Ivy wrote across the top in soft, deliberate strokes. Page 8. Will and Chance found each other, Will noticed. His eye a soft green with something broken but bright beneath followed her movements. He didn't say anything, but his hand unconsciously slid toward Chance's scruff, fingers digging gently into the dog's thick fur. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, Ivy said without looking up. Her voice was light, like the breeze slipping through a cracked window. Will nodded, grateful. But after a moment, his voice came anyway. His name's Chance because he's the only one that gave me one. Ivy looked up, her pencil still in hand. Will was staring at the floor now, one knee bouncing. I got him after stuff happened, he mumbled. Foster place number 4. I didn't talk then, barely ate. But Will gestured at the retriever, who hadn't moved a muscle. He just laid beside me for like hours, days, just kept showing up. Ivy understood that feeling too well. The kind of showing up that mattered. Not with speeches or plans, just presence. He's good at that, she said, and Will smiled just barely. Outside, the wind picked up, fluttering the edge of a newspaper on the porch. Leaves scraped softly against the wood like nature was taking a breath. But inside, it was still and warm. The kind of warm that sinks into your socks, into your rib cage, into the parts of you that forgot what safety felt like. Lucas came in from the hallway carrying a small blanket. He didn't speak either, just gave a quiet nod to Will and gently placed it over the boy's lap before heading to the kitchen. It wasn't charity. It wasn't showy. It was normal, the kind of normal that people like Will hadn't known often enough. Ivy began to draw. Her pencil moved slowly at first, lines sketching the soft curve of Chance's ears. Then the outline of Will's shoes, still caked with old dirt and bits of gravel from wherever he'd last stayed. She captured the way Chance leaned into Coda, how his tail curled slightly inward, small, dog-like sign of humility or gratitude. Maybe both. Will leaned forward slightly, watching her sketch. I used to draw, he said, voice almost unsure if it was okay to remember. Ivy didn't stop her strokes. You still can. Will's voice dropped. I got told it was a waste of time. Well, Ivy replied, looking up. Some people see heroes only in capes. That's their problem. She turned the sketchpad toward him. In rough pencil and smudge shading, there he was, Will, sitting cross-legged with Chance by his side. The background was unfinished, just the suggestion of warmth and shelter. But the look in the boy's eyes, that was complete. And it was hopeful. Will stared at it like it was something sacred. Not because it was perfect, but because someone had seen him, really seen him, and drawn him anyway. His throat bobbed. Could I draw something on the next page? Ivy grinned. Of course. She handed him the pencil, eraser end first. Will hesitated, then flipped the sketchbook. A new blank page, and on it, with unsteady but determined hands, he began to draw. At first it was just rough shapes, a boy and a dog. Then shadows behind, them tall and jagged. Will shaded those in darker. But between the shadows and the boy, he drew something Ivy hadn't expected. A light. Not a sun. Not a lantern. Just a soft, steady glow between the boy and his dog. Like a space carved out of fear. Like a place to breathe again. I think this is the page where things start getting better, Will whispered. Ivy felt her chest tighten not with sadness, but with that full, stretching kind of feeling that only hope can bring. Coda yawned beside them, the sound low and content. Chance let out a quiet huff, as if in agreement. And for a long, quiet while, no one said anything more. They didn't have to. Because outside, the world might still be spinning with its storms and bruises and broken places, but in that little living room, under soft yellow light and pencil marks and shared silence, another chapter had just begun. And on page 8, two souls had found their way home. In a world often too quick to judge what's broken, stories like Coda's remind us of something deeper, something human. Love, loyalty, and healing don't wear perfect faces or walk in straight lines. Sometimes they limp. Sometimes they bear scars. But they endure. Coda, a scarred German shepherd with a heart bigger than his wounds, became more than a rescue dog. He became a mirror reflecting the courage in a little girl who once felt invisible, and later, in a boy brave enough to knock on a door and ask for belonging. Through Hearts and Hounds, we see what's possible when empathy leads the way, when we stop labeling pain as weakness, when we let animals teach us what it means to show up, to stay, and to heal alongside one another. German shepherds like Coda are more than service animals, they're soul companions. They sense storms before they arrive. They love without needing words. And sometimes, they save us just by surviving. So, if you're reading this, let it be a reminder. The world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more hearts willing to sit beside someone human or dog and say, "You're not less, you're brave, and I see you." That's how healing begins. That's how love lasts.